blood. Crying, footsteps pounding through a suburban mausoleum. We open on Dexter, sprinting through Trinity's house, breath sharp, camera tight on his face, as he realizes the plan to end Arthur Mitchell cleanly has already slipped. Cut to baby Harrison on the floor, wailing in a pool of blood, framed exactly as we remember. Then to the original image, Rita's bathtub, perfectly still, perfectly red, perfectly empty. And then the cut that breaks canon. Same bathroom, same harsh light. But this time, the water is only half full, streaked pink. Paramedics crash through the doorway as Rita jerks upright, gasping, coughing blood and bathwater, clawing for air. Her hand hits the porcelain, where her lifeless arm used to hang. The scream we hear isn't Dexter's, it's hers. Over this, we hear Dexter's narration from earlier that season, repurposed like a lie he's still telling himself. He talks about balance, about finally securing a safe double life. Husband, father, serial killer, all in neat compartments. As he insists he's in control, the visuals refuse to cooperate. Sirens strobing across the Mitchell house. Police tape snapping in the wind. Harrison's tiny hospital bracelet streaked with dried blood. Rita on a gurney staring into space, eyes wide and unfocused. This is our first paradox. Survival looks worse than death. The body lives, but the illusion dies. Let's kick things off by pushing that paradox forward in time. Rapid flashes, Lumen standing in the barrel room, shaking as she faces the men who destroyed her life. But in the far background, barely in focus, Rita's minivan, parked outside the warehouse, a ghost of domesticity, haunting Dexter's vigilante project. Smash to Hannah McKay's syringe, hovering over Dexter's neck. In this version, the reflection in the metal isn't just Dexter's face. It's a framed photo of Rita and the kids on his wall. Watching the scene unfold. Deb in the shipping container, gun trembling, as she decides between Lagerta and Dexter. Only now, there's a children's drawing taped to the storage crate behind them. A stick figure family labeled Mom, Dad, Cody, Astor, Harrison. Rita's name is still on the page. She never left the story. Dexter just planned as if she did. In this video, we're going to treat Rita's survival not as a mercy, but as the first visible crack in Dexter's fantasy of control. The focus is not just on how this changes the plot, but on how it rewires the psychology of every later season. Every time Dexter thinks he's contained the blood, it leaks. Into family, into police work, into love. What happens when the person who was supposed to be his tragic endpoint is forced to live through the investigation instead? We land on a hospital hallway. Fluorescent lights hum. Dexter sits alone, shirt splattered with Rita's blood, hands clasped so tight they shake. He whispers, "I can fix this." The light above him flickers, once, twice, like a failing heartbeat. Each major section will trace how that whispered plan collapses, not in one clean tragedy, but in a slower, more suffocating descent he never prepared for. Because if Rita never dies, Dexter doesn't lose his cover. He loses his excuse. If we freeze Dexter in that flickering light, clutching at an excuse that never arrives, we hit the paradox that drives this entire what if. Dexter believes in control. He believes the code, the rituals, the careful stalking and cleanup keep his world sealed off from each other. Stalk the target. Confirm the victims. Prepare the kill room. But when we track the series, plan by plan, what actually emerges is not mastery, but a chain reaction of miscalculations and collapsing strategies. From Brian manipulating his childhood, to Dokes reading his patterns, to Lagerta reopening the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation, the so-called perfect system keeps springing leaks. These are not rare exceptions. These are the rule. In this video, we're going to treat Dexter's life as one long experiment in failed control, where every safeguard he trusts becomes the very mechanism that exposes him. And in that experiment, Rita is the variable the original show removed as quickly and brutally as possible. Rita's murder is the writer's thesis statement in blood. The safest, most carefully constructed plan Dexter ever makes is not a kill room. It's a normal family. A suburban house, a baby in pajamas, Harrison's mobile spinning above a crib. He tells himself this is his firewall, the thing that will contain the dark passenger. The bathtub proves it was always built on a lie. The code doesn't protect them. It delivers Trinity to their front door. Now flip it. In this timeline, Rita survives. Maybe Dexter finds Harrison in blood, but reaches the bathroom in time. Maybe Trinity never gets that final strike. Either way, the illusion doesn't shatter in one night, it decays. Her survival doesn't save him. It prolongs and exposes the failure. Because the central question is not, what if Rita lived and everything was fine? It's what happens when every major plan Dexter makes, from Trinity to New Blood, has to mutate, while the person he endangers most is still standing in the blast radius. To keep this clear, we're going to contrast Dexter's self-image with his actual trajectory. He sees himself as a controlled predator, a surgeon cutting out rot while shielding Rita, Deb, and Harrison. But every time he tries to protect someone, the plan either backfires or demands a worse lie. Leela saves him by killing Dokes. Miguel turns apprenticeship into conspiracy. Lumen turns trauma into a temporary partnership that implodes the second normal life reappears. Survival doesn't end the damage, it deepens it. Now imagine those same patterns with Rita watching. Season 5's single dad cover story? Gone. Lumen living in his house? Rewired or impossible. Deb's slow burn suspicion? Delayed or detonated in a completely different way when she has to navigate not just a brother's secret, but a sister-in-law's questions. Along the way, every escape plan, from the boat to Harrison's future to Iron Lake, stops being a solo calculation and becomes a ticking bomb Dexter can't fully see yet. Each major section will walk season by season through that bomb's timer. Next, we'll start with Trinity's aftermath and watch how one surviving woman turns Dexter's greatest claimed victory into the beginning of his longest, most intimate collapse. So to keep this clear, we're not building an alternate universe out of random what-ifs and quirky coincidences. We're running a controlled experiment on Dexter Morgan's life. Change one variable, Rita survives Trinity, and then track, step by step, how that survival infects every plan he makes afterward. In this video, we're going to treat each major Dexter storyline as a plan, not as a body count or a villain of the season checklist. A plan is Dexter's attempt to impose control on chaos, a strategy for managing his dark passenger, protecting his family, and preserving the illusion that the code can keep everything in neat, blood-wrapped boxes. Stalk the target. Maintain the marriage. Keep the job. Hide the truth. Each arc is one of these structures, built with rules and assumptions, and our job is to watch where the structure cracks. That means the focus is not just on how Rita avoids becoming Trinity's final tableau. We're less interested in the exact mechanics of her survival. Does Dexter get there in time? Does Trinity get interrupted? Does the investigation close differently? And more interested in the aftermath. Imagine Dexter still finding Harrison in blood, but Rita is alive in the next room, traumatized, asking what kind of life her husband has dragged them into. That's the pressure point. That's where every later plan starts, from a different emotional baseline. From there, each major section will follow a simple question. How does Rita's continued presence mutate Dexter's strategy? Season 5's single dad widower plan becomes something else entirely, When Rita is there to question the late nights, the missing car, the lies that no longer have the cover of grief. Lumen doesn't just move into an empty house, she collides with a wife who wants answers. Hannah isn't just a dangerous love interest, she's a direct threat to a marriage Dexter is still pretending he can protect. Along the way, we'll track 3 recurring miscalculations like evidence bags in an investigation. First, Dexter chronically underestimates other people's intelligence and agency. Rita's suspicions, Deb's instincts, Harrison's perceptions as he grows. Second, he overestimates his own emotional detachment, assuming he can watch his family's suffering without it warping his code or his trajectory. Third, he clings to the belief that secrets can be quarantined forever, as if the blood never seeps under the door. We're keeping the broad strokes recognizable. Trinity still hunts, Lumen still appears, Hannah still poisons, Deb still breaks, new blood still waits in the snow. But every arc gets rewired around one central question. What does this look like if Rita is still here, watching, judging, and surviving the consequences? This isn't just fan fiction speculation. It's a structural autopsy of Dexter's double life, using Rita's survival as a stress test for every plan he thinks he can control. Next, we'll start with the Trinity aftermath itself, and watch how the perfect family man Fade begins to collapse the moment the woman it was built around refuses to die on schedule. So if Rita refuses to die on schedule, we need a new way to track the damage. The bathtub doesn't fill with blood, but the fracture in Dexter's life still does. To keep this clear, we're going to group everything that follows into 3 kinds of failure: operational, relational, and existential. Operational failures are the tactical breakdowns: the plan, the ritual, the mask. Stalk the target, confirm the victims, prepare the kill room, leave no evidence. That's the fantasy. In reality, we get Trinity finding Rita, Dokes reading the blood slides, LaGuardia following the Bay Harbor pattern. These are the moments where Dexter misreads the threat surface, trusts his own control, and the investigation starts to close in. By that standard, Rita surviving Trinity isn't just a close call. It's the single biggest operational breach of Dexter's career. He doesn't just underestimate Arthur Mitchell. He brings him into his family, lets him hold Harrison, and assumes that compartmentalization will hold. In the original timeline, the price is Rita's life. In this version, she lives through the attempt, which means the consequences don't disappear into tragedy. They stay in the room. They talk to the police. They remember. Relational failures are different. These are the emotional miscalculations, where Dexter assumes everyone around him will keep playing the roles he's assigned. Rita as the oblivious spouse, Deb as the loyal cop who never looks at him too closely, Harrison as a blank slate who won't repeat his trauma. But we've already seen that fantasy collapse. Lumen discovers his secret and demands partnership, not ignorance. Deb walks in on the doomsday kill and refuses to go back to being just his sister. Each time, Dexter's psychology runs into other people's agency, and the fallout reshapes his entire trajectory. If Rita survives, she becomes the ultimate relational variable. She's no longer the symbol of the life he lost. She's a living witness to what his double life actually costs. Every lie about late nights and work emergencies now sits next to the memory of Trinity in her house. How long before her intuition catches the pattern he's desperate to hide? Then we have existential failures, the cracks in the story Dexter tells himself about who he is. He clings to the code as a moral firewall. He repeats that he's a monster who can't really feel, yet the series keeps breaking that narrative. Brian forces him to choose Deb over his true self. Harry's suicide reveals the code as a failed experiment, not divine law. New Blood ends with Harrison calling him out as a killer who only pretends it's about justice. In this video, we're going to watch how Rita's continued presence presses on that fracture every day. Operationally, she's the unsolved crime scene that never goes away. Relationally, she's a constant mirror, reflecting back the husband Dexter thinks he is versus the predator he actually is. Existentially, she turns the central question into a countdown. How long can he pretend to be both without everything collapsing again? Each major section will return to these three layers as we move through the post-Trinity seasons, asking, every time a plan fails, what changes if Rita is still there to see it? So, to keep this clear, we need a roadmap, a broken timeline we can walk in order, even as we deliberately snap its biggest hinge, that bathtub in the Season 4 finale. In this video, we're going to move chronologically from Season 1 all the way through New Blood, but everything orients around that one pivot. Before the Trinity bathroom, we're in setup mode, tracking how Dexter builds the fantasy of control. After it, we're in fallout, asking how every single plan bends, warps, or completely collapses once Rita doesn't die. Let's kick things off with the pre-Rita survival groundwork. Season 1 is our first relational blueprint. Dexter's plan to be a normal boyfriend with Rita while secretly living by the code. We'll watch him juggle date nights and dismemberment, Brian weaponizing family trauma, and Deb standing one confession away from the truth. The focus is not just on the ice truck killer investigation, but on how Dexter learns the wrong lesson, that he can keep love and murder in separate boxes forever. Season 2 escalates that delusion. The Bay Harbor Butcher case is Dexter's first major operational failure, built from the very bloodslide and ocean dumps he trusted. We'll track Leela burning his life down, Dokes circling him on instinct alone, and the moment Dexter walks away, believing survival equals invincibility. What changes in that psychology if the person waiting at home is a wife who will eventually remember every lie? Season 3 gives us Miguel, an alliance Dexter thinks he can manage, an apprentice he thinks he can control, a friendship that nearly exposes his double life to the entire justice system. Each major section will pause here to ask, if Rita survives later, how do these early cracks in trust and secrecy come back to haunt him? Then we hit the pivot. We'll replay the Season 4 finale, but in our version, Dexter finds Harrison in blood, and Rita alive, or barely saved. From that point on, we're in an alternate trajectory. Season 5 becomes the Lumen arc without widower Dexter. No grieving single dad, no empty house to share. Instead, a still married man trying to run a vigilante partnership in the shadows of a family he just almost lost. How does that distort the Jordan Chase investigation? And who becomes the scapegoat when Rita starts asking where he goes at night? Season 6 rewires the Doomsday case around a husband who can't claim emotional ruin as cover. Seasons 7 and 8 tighten the vis, Deb's spiral on one side, Rita's suspicions on the other, each holding different pieces of the truth, as every plan to contain the damage fails. Finally, we'll treat New Blood as endgame, an older Dexter in Iron Lake, still tethered to Rita and Harrison in some form, trying one last reinvention. Along the way, we'll background some side plots and minor villains so we can stay locked on the major choices that actually redirect his life when Rita doesn't die, and why his myth of control collapses even harder when he never truly faces it. So if New Blood is endgame, we have to rewind to the first draft of the fantasy. Season 1 is where Dexter builds the prototype, a life where the dark passenger hunts at night while a damaged, gentle woman and her kids make him look harmless in daylight. Let's kick things off with that initial plan. Dexter doesn't fall for Rita because he's overwhelmed by feeling. he selects her. She's traumatized, sexually withdrawn, exhausted from surviving Paul. In his psychology, that makes her perfect. Low demands, low questions, high camouflage. He can show up with groceries, fix a tire, play with Astor and Cody, and no one expects deep intimacy from a man helping out a broken single mom. On paper, it's brilliant control, a relationship designed to never actually touch him. But to keep this clear, Season 1 immediately shows us how miscalibrated that control really is. While Dexter is telling himself Rita is safely outside his world, he's already neck-deep in the ice truck killer investigation. He's staging bodies, receiving blood-soaked love letters from Brian, and watching Deb chase the same killer who is dissecting Dexter's childhood. The orbit tightens fast. Rita's car gets sabotaged by Paul. Deb moves in with Rudy, who is literally Dexter's brother. The supposed shield is standing 3 feet from the epicenter without knowing it. Operationally, this is our first major misread. Dexter assumes that because he feels nothing, because he's compartmentalized, the danger won't spill. Yet his job in forensics, his proximity to Deb, his pattern of getting pulled into headline cases, all drag Rita and the kids into the blast radius. The plan fails before he even recognizes there is a risk. If Brian had chosen Rita instead of Deb for that final tableau, the bathtub image we associate with Trinity could have appeared in Season 1. Relationally, the blind spots are even sharper. Rita is not static. She slowly regains agency. She stands up to Paul in court. She fights to keep him away from the kids. She starts trusting Dexter more deeply, inviting him into decisions, into holidays, into her recovery. The woman he thought would never press becomes the one person quietly tracking his inconsistencies, the late arrivals, the vague explanations, the bruises he can't fully account for. We can already see the alternate timeline forming. If she survives a serial killer later, this is the version of Rita who will not accept work emergency as an answer. And under all of this is the existential failure seed. Harry's code promises a normal life as the reward for discipline. Follow the rules, pick the right targets, and you can have a family. Yet Season 1 makes that promise look hollow. Dexter is lying to someone who is genuinely healing in his presence. He watches Rita blossom precisely because she believes he is safe. That moral fracture is small now, but it's the same fracture that explodes around Trinity when his actions put her in direct danger. In this video, we're going to treat Season 1 not as prologue, but as blueprint. The focus is not just on how Dexter becomes the Bay Harbor Butcher, but on how every assumption he makes about Rita's passivity and his own containment is already wrong. Because in the world where Rita doesn't die in a bathtub, those early lies don't disappear. They come back as questions. And the next time blood touches that family, what happens when she finally asks all of them at once? So when we talk about Rita's survival later, we have to go back to the first time Dexter's double life almost detonated right in front of her. Season 2 isn't just the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation. It's the prototype for a plan that fails on every level, while Rita stands 3 feet from the blast radius and never sees the bomb. Let's kick things off with Dexter's containment strategy. On paper, it's elegant. Keep Dokes focused on him as a weirdo, not a killer. Feed the task force just enough forensic insight to steer the investigation away from his ocean dumps. And at home, explain every blackout, every lie, every disappearing act with one neat, socially acceptable label: addiction. To keep this clear, Dexter doesn't just pick any cover story. He picks one that makes Rita feel morally obligated to stay. From Dokes tailing him through Miami to those blood slides glinting inside Dexter's air conditioner, the operational side of that plan almost collapses in slow motion. Dokes doesn't buy the act. His instincts lock onto Dexter's patterns with terrifying precision. The investigation closes in, not because Dexter slips once, but because his entire ritual is traceable. The slides, the marina records, the consistent dumping ground. When Dokes finds the slide box, Dexter's control over the narrative shatters. Suddenly, the evidence that was supposed to be his private trophy case becomes the state's entire case file. Then we get the cabin. The central question in that sequence is simple. What happens when Dexter runs out of clever moves and has to rely on chaos? He imprisons Dokes, tries to frame him, and the whole thing spirals until Leela blows up the problem for him. That explosion is the only reason the investigation ends. Not the code. Not the plan. A pyromaniac ex-girlfriend. Operationally, Season 2 proves Dexter survives as much through other people's failures as his own skill. But the real damage is relational. To protect the Bay Harbor secret, Dexter manufactures a different secret. He confesses to Rita that he's a drug addict. We watch her break, rage, then decide to stand by him. She goes to meetings with him. She believes she's helping him become better. Every amends speech, every promise of change, deepens her emotional investment in a man whose true nightly ritual is far worse than anything she imagines. Now, bring that history to the alternate Trinity night. In this video, we're going to treat Rita's survival as a psychological detonator, not a mercy. She's already forgiven Dexter for a lie that almost destroyed their relationship once. If she lives through a serial killer attack, wakes up in a hospital, or staggers out of that bathroom, how does she not replay every past inconsistency in her head? The late nights, the missing time, the way danger keeps orbiting her family. The focus is not just on whether she believes him again, but on how long Dexter can keep rerunning the same broken plan, blame the chaos on something manageable, promise reform, and hope love covers the gaps in his story. If Rita could accept a recovering addict, what happens when the pattern of danger and secrets continues after Trinity? At what point does the Bay Harbor lie, the Lila fire, and the Trinity trauma fuse into one unbearable question? Who did I actually marry? Because in the world where Rita doesn't die, Dexter doesn't just get a second chance at family. He gets a living, breathing witness to the entire trajectory of his failures, and the next time his control slips, she's not starting from zero anymore. And we've already seen a rehearsal of how badly that can go. Before Trinity, before Rita as witness is even imaginable, Season 3 gives Dexter a prototype, Miguel Prado, a charismatic, powerful ally who doesn't just brush up against the secret, he's invited into it. To keep this clear, Dexter's plan with Miguel is almost domestic in its own way. Selective honesty, controlled access, a curated tour of the dark passenger. He walks Miguel through the ritual, the plastic, the knives, the language of the code as if it's a moral upgrade, not a leash on a compulsion. Dexter thinks he can do 3 things at once: gain a political shield, relieve his isolation, and still remain the architect of every kill. He decides what Miguel can know, when Miguel can participate, and which parts of his own psychology stay locked away. On paper, it's elegant. In practice, it's a live grenade, because operational control slips almost immediately. Miguel improvises. He stalks his own targets. He rejects the code the first time it inconveniences his anger. The focus is not just on the fact that he kills. It's on how fast he repurposes Dexter's secret into a weapon for his personal grudges. One shared kill becomes a permission slip. One lesson in wrapping a body becomes a toolkit for unsanctioned murder. Once someone else is inside the ritual, they stop being a student and start being a variable. And here's the pattern interrupt. Miguel doesn't just betray Dexter as a killer. He betrays him as a friend. For Dexter, this is the first time someone he has let that close turns his carefully managed darkness against him. Miguel threatens to expose him, manipulates the fear of discovery, and forces Dexter into a kill that feels less like a hunt and more like a cover-up of his own failed plan. It's not just operational failure, it's relational collapse. Now, map that psychology onto Rita. Miguel is the nightmare beta test for what it means to share, even partially, who he really is. The central question becomes, what happens if Rita, after Trinity, starts seeing patterns? Late nights that don't match his forensics schedule. The Bay Harbor investigation files she remembers from the news. The Leela fire she never fully understood. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to this pressure point, because Miguel proves that once someone has leverage on Dexter's truth, they don't stay inside the role he's written for them. Miguel's arc also cracks the mythology of the code itself. It doesn't function as a universal moral shield. It's a fragile story Dexter tells himself about being different from the monsters he hunts. When he tries to export that story into another person, they don't inherit his restraints. They only inherit his methods. That's the existential tremor of Season 3, the realization that the code can't scale. So, in the alternate future, where Rita survives Trinity, Dexter is cornered between two collapsing options. Keep her in the dark and risk her slow, suspicious investigation of his life. Or attempt another managed disclosure and recreate the Miguel scenario inside his own marriage. Each major section will show how often he chooses the illusion of control over the reality of risk. But Miguel's failure is the warning shot he ignores, and Rita's survival is where that oversight finally comes due. Miguel's failure is the warning shot he ignores. And Season 4 is where Dexter convinces himself he can design a life that absorbs that warning and still keep killing. White picket fence, backyard barbecues, a baby in his arms, and a body in his trunk. This is the fantasy, not to give up the dark passenger, but to domesticate it. In this video, we're going to treat Dexter's Season 4 objective as a full-blown operational plan. He believes he can maintain a picture-perfect suburban life with Rita and the kids, while continuing to hunt as the ghost of the Bay Harbor butcher, invisible and untouchable. The central question for him is not should I stop, but how do I schedule this better? Harry's code becomes a project management tool, not a moral line. To keep this clear, look at the concrete strain on his system. Sleepless nights with Harrison blur into late-night stalking runs. He nods off at the wheel with a corpse in the trunk and plows into another car. That crash isn't just a plot beat, it's the physical manifestation of an overloaded design. His rituals get sloppy, his evidence control frays, his on-set-precise investigation work at Miami Metro turns erratic because he's literally running on fumes. From a blood slide left, where it shouldn't be, to half-baked cover stories about work, we watch the logistics wobble before Trinity ever learns his name. These are not rare exceptions in Dexter's life. These are the rule. Whenever he adds a new role, boyfriend, husband, father, the existing structure doesn't adapt, it buckles. Relationally, the collapse starts even earlier. Rita is no longer the fragile, grateful partner from Season 1. She has agency, history, and a memory. She tracks his absences, feels the emotional distance, and pushes back. When she discovers the secret apartment, it's a direct echo of Leela and Miguel, but now inside his marriage. She demands honest communication, asks where he goes, why he lies, what he's hiding. Dexter reads this as noise in the system, not a signal that his double life is already poisoning the family he claims to protect. The focus is not just on Dexter missing date night, it's on the psychology of a man who interprets a collapsing marriage as a time management issue. He tells himself that if he can just optimize naps, stakeouts, and diaper changes, he can keep everyone safe. He never truly entertains the idea that the danger is not poor planning, it's the existence of the plan at all. And that's what makes the bathtub so devastating in the original timeline. Trinity doesn't merely kill Rita, he kills the fantasy that Dexter can have everything without consequences. In our version, though, that same night becomes something else entirely. Blood, the baby, the terror remain, but Rita lives. So what happens when the fantasy survives the impact, limps forward, and has to pretend nothing has changed? That's where the real investigation begins. We stay in that hallway with Dexter, but this time the future tilts a few degrees instead of snapping in half. The blood, the echo of his childhood, the sense that his plan for a safe suburban shell has finally collapsed, it all still arrives. It just doesn't claim Rita. To keep this clear, we need a single grounded divergence, not a magic rewrite. Dexter leaves Trinity's house rattled. He's seen the family, felt the near miss of Trinity getting close to his own. On the drive home, control finally slips into anxiety. He breaks pattern and calls Rita. She answers from the car, stuck in airport traffic, apologizing that she's running late. In that tiny deviation, a phone call Dexter almost never makes, the ritual window shifts. By the time Arthur Mitchell reaches the house, Rita isn't soaking in a full bathtub. She's just arrived, juggling a baby bag, maybe starting the water, maybe checking a voicemail. The focus is not just on logistics, it's on how Dexter's paranoia saves her and damns her in the same breath. Because Trinity still gets in. He still escalates. He just doesn't have the time or privacy his ritual demands. Here we take the alternate path. Trinity starts the ritual, positions Rita in the tub, and then reality intrudes. A neighbor hears raised voices. Harrison starts crying in the other room. Maybe the front door, hastily closed, doesn't fully latch, and swings with a gust of wind. The control of the tableau fractures. Arthur panics, cuts her, but aborts. He flees with his pattern broken, leaving Rita gravely injured, the bathroom a half-finished replica of Dexter's origin story. Dexter arrives minutes later. Harrison is still on the bathroom floor, in blood that's mostly Rita's and partially from Trinity's aborted staging. The central question hits us hard. Does the trauma count if the victim survives? Visually, the rhyme is intact. Baby, blood, mother in the tub. But psychologically, everything is skewed. Harrison's first memory is still painted in red, yet his mother will be there to tell him it happened, to fold that horror into the family narrative instead of disappearing from it. From an investigative standpoint, this scene still screams Trinity. The cut patterns, the attempted staging, the partial fill of the tub, Rita's description of his face, once she's stabilized, all lock into the existing task force profile. There's no plausible copycat. Her trauma becomes part of the official case file, a living exhibit that gives Lundy's work and Deb's investigation closure without erasing the human cost. Trinity is still the monster of Season 4. He's just left a witness instead of a corpse. And Dexter? Along the way, his internal pivot is immediate. He doesn't get to collapse into pure grief. He has to perform. EMTs, officers, Deb, maybe even reporters, everyone treats him as the almost widower. In this video, we're going to keep returning to this moment, because here he makes a new plan on the spot. Protect Rita from the truth of his connection to Trinity at any cost. That decision feels like control. In reality, it's the first quiet move in a slow-motion implosion. If Rita lives, Dexter's double life doesn't end in that bathroom. It metastasizes. So what does a marriage look like when one partner's survival is literally built on the other's lies? We cut from that hypothetical bathroom to a different kind of crime scene. A hospital corridor, fluorescent lights, Rita on a gurney. She's alive. Barely, and instantly, The entire Trinity investigation bends around her. To keep this clear, Rita is no longer just Dexter's wife. She's a surviving Trinity victim. The central question for Miami Metro becomes, how did this killer get so close to their own blood spatter analyst's family? Reporters swarm. Lundy's files get dragged back out. Every press conference has Dexter in the background, expression controlled, while the lower third reads husband of Trinity survivor. He's inside the investigation and inside the story. And those two roles cannot stay separate for long. In this video, we're going to lean into that pressure cooker, because the focus is not just on Trinity being caught, but on how Dexter's failed plan to keep his worlds apart turns into a domestic time bomb. Rita is giving statements. Masuka is processing her bathroom. LaGuerta is asking whether any of Dexter's prior cases show similar patterns. Every question aimed at Rita ricochets back toward him. And then there's the ghost in the room, Kyle Butler. Out in the suburbs, Arthur Mitchell's neighbors and family still remember a quiet, attentive friend who showed up right before everything collapsed. They know the face, the voice, the psychology he performed. All it takes is one composite sketch, one neighbor saying, "He looked like this." And suddenly, Miami Metro has a person of interest named Kyle, who, inconveniently, looks a lot like Dexter Morgan in glasses. Here's the pattern interrupt. In the original season, Kyle Butler is a dead end. Here, he's a boomerang. It keeps coming back. When that sketch hits the squad room corkboard, Rita sees it on the evening news from her hospital bed. She frowns. Dexter tenses. Did she just recognize him? Or did she recognize the way he's pretending not to react? Rita's perception shifts in small, accumulating moments. She replays his recent absences around Thanksgiving, the late nights at a new apartment he never really explained, his eerie, almost rehearsed knowledge of Trinity's rituals when the cops first briefed the family. Trauma makes her hypervigilant. Why did her husband seem less shocked by the pattern than everyone else? Why did he have a place of his own she never saw? Suddenly, Dexter is not just managing an external investigation. He's fighting an internal one. He nudges witness statements away from the Kyle description. He forgets to log a tip that mentions the alias. He steers Quinn and Deb toward other leads, weaponizing his access to evidence to keep control. Every manipulation protects him from arrest, but also from a far more intimate failure, Rita realizing he brought Trinity into their orbit. We end this beat on a quiet, poisoned image. Dexter sits by Rita's hospital bed, holding her hand, promising she's safe now. The monitors beep steadily. Her eyes close. But as he looks up, we cut to that police sketch of Kyle Butler on a bulletin board, the likeness tightening, the lines sharpening, inching closer to their front door. And once that face is out in the open, the next phase of collapse isn't about catching Trinity at all. It's about who realizes that Dexter has been wearing masks in his own home. So when that sketch of Kyle Butler inches toward the Morgan front door, the real threat isn't Trinity anymore. It's time. Attention. The slow forensic investigation of Dexter's home life by the people who live there. Let's kick things off with Lumen crashing into that pressure cooker. In the original season 5, Dexter finds her as a widower looking for an outlet. Here, he finds her as a husband who has just watched Rita almost die in a bathtub he filled with lies. Lumen chained in that warehouse is no longer just a mirror for his dark passenger. She's a living echo of what Trinity nearly did to Rita, and of what Dexter did to Rita's sense of safety long before Arthur ever showed up. In this video, we're going to treat Dexter's new plan as a case study in self-deception. On paper, it's elegant. Help Lumen hunt down the men who tortured her. Apply the code. Turn his guilt over the Trinity ordeal into action. all while presenting himself at home as the reformed family man, going to couples therapy, reading trauma articles, telling Rita he's finally ready to be present. 2 tracks. One redemption arc for public consumption, one private kill room for his conscience. To keep this clear, the focus is not just on who Dexter kills with Lumen, but on what that double schedule does to his already fragile control. Every night he spends stalking Lumen's abusers is a night he is not sitting in a therapist's office with Rita, not rocking Harrison back to sleep, not answering Astor's questions about why mom screams when the shower turns on. The cross-contamination is immediate. His alibis get thinner. His exhaustion gets harder to hide. The same late nights that once read as quirky workaholism now land as abandonment in the middle of Rita's healing. Rita feels it. She clocks the way Dexter flinches when a news report mentions the Barrel Girls. She notices the locked phone, the sudden work emergencies, the way his eyes glaze over in therapy when she talks about feeling watched. At first, she reads it through the psychology she's been given. Trauma, avoidance, maybe even an affair. Isn't this exactly what men do after a crisis? Pull away, find a distraction, build a secret life that isn't covered in hospital antiseptic? But as the season progresses, that interpretation starts to strain. Dexter isn't just distant. He's alert in strange, predatory ways. He pays too much attention to certain case details, too little to his kids. The investigation in Rita's mind shifts from, is he cheating? To what is he actually doing out there? Long before she reaches homicide, she reaches a quieter, more destabilizing fear that her husband's need for control will always outrun her need for safety. And this is where the existential tension spikes. Dexter convinces himself that helping Lumen balances the scales, that every abuser on his table is interest paid on the debt he brought into Rita's life. In reality, he's replaying the same pattern, using one wounded woman as a moral alibi for the lies he tells another. The plan feels cleaner. The consequences are not. Because once Rita starts following those lies, step by step, the next collapse won't come from a serial killer. It'll come from inside his own house. So when that collapse finally does come from inside his own house, it doesn't look cinematic at first. It looks like steam on a bathroom mirror, a locked door, and Rita sitting fully clothed on the edge of the tub because she can't make herself turn the water on. Let's kick things off with that early recovery window the show never gave us. Flashbacks hit her in fragments, Trinity's hammer, the sound of Harrison crying, the way the bathroom tiles seem to tilt under her. She startles at every noise. She double-checks the locks 3 times. She hovers over Harrison's crib at 3 a.m., watching his chest rise and fall like it might stop if she looks away. And every time the panic spikes, she reaches for the same anchor. Dexter, in those first weeks, he's the safe object her trauma psychology latches onto. The protector, the man who caught Trinity and brought her home. She clings to him in bed, apologizing for being needy, reinforcing his belief that the plan is still working. Keep her close, keep her grateful, keep control of the narrative. But then, therapy enters the picture, and the trajectory shifts. A mandated victim counselor, a soft office, a therapist who keeps circling back to patterns. Not just this attack, but Paul's abuse. Not just Paul, but the ice truck killer, leaving a Barbie head in her fridge. Not just random horror, but a chain of men and secrets orbiting her life. To keep this clear, the focus is not just on what happened to Rita, but on how often it happens near Dexter. Session by session, she's asked the central question trauma work always returns to, what's the common denominator? At first, she says, me, I choose bad men. I attract danger. Then, the investigation in her own head widens. She starts revisiting those red flags the audience screamed about in season 2 and 3. Dexter's car crash with a body in the trunk that somehow vanished. His vague addiction confession that never quite matched the behavior. The secret apartment she wasn't supposed to see. His uncanny ability to predict serial killer behavior, always one step ahead of the official case file. One memory is a coincidence. 4 line up like evidence. Her questions evolve. They move from, "Why did this happen to me?" to quiet, late-night probes. "Why does this keep happening around you? Why does every big case at Miami Metro seem to bleed into their living room? Why was Trinity obsessed with Dexter's alias and not anyone else on the task force?" Each major section of their marriage that Dexter thought was contained now reopens. He scrambles. New lies, more elaborate cover stories, last-minute explanations that don't quite match the timestamps on his phone or the bruises on his knuckles. Operationally, this is a nightmare. Every improvised excuse drains bandwidth he used to reserve for stalking and cleanup. Every follow-up question is a micro-investigation he can't control. And this is where Rita becomes a new kind of threat. Not a villain, not a blackmailer, a loving partner whose healing depends on truth. Harry's code prepared Dexter for cops, for killers, even for a sister who might turn on him. It never prepared him for a wife who survives, recovers, and calmly refuses to live inside his lie. Because once Rita's recovery demands honesty, Dexter's entire plan for a normal life isn't just under stress, it's under cross-examination. And the next person to take the stand is Deborah. If Deborah is taking the stand, Rita and Lumen are the surprise witnesses Dexter never planned for. 2 women, 2 traumas, 1 man trying to control both narratives at once. Because in this version of Season 5, Rita survives Trinity, and Lumen survives the Barrel Girls. They are parallel case files in the same investigation into male violence. 1 left bleeding in a bathtub, 1 left in a barrel. 1 rebuilding a suburban life, 1 rebuilding a self. And Dexter, true to his psychology, decides he can manage both. On paper, the plan is elegant. Help Rita heal in the daylight. Help Lumen hunt in the dark. Compartmentalize the marriage, the mission, the monster. To keep this clear, Dexter tells himself a simple story. He is giving Rita safety, he is giving Lumen justice, and Harry's code can stretch just enough to cover both. In practice, the seams start to show immediately. Picture Dexter at the kitchen table, Harrison in a high chair, Rita talking through trauma counseling options. The phone buzzes. It's Lumen, panicked from a warehouse, whispering about a man who got away. Rita hears the tone in his voice change. She doesn't know the words, but she recognizes the distance. How many of these near misses can a marriage take? We get the stray earring on the floor of Dexter's car, a different brand of coffee cup in the cup holder, a faint bruise on his arm in a place that doesn't line up with police work or parenting. Each detail small, each detail plausible. Together, they tighten the noose around his double life far faster than any formal investigation ever could. And underneath the logistics, there's a deeper moral dissonance. Every hour Dexter spends stalking a Barrel Girl abuser with Lumen is an hour he is not holding Rita while she shakes in the night. Every surge of empathy he unlocks by coaching Lumen through her fear is empathy siphoned away from the woman who almost died because of him. The focus is not just on whether the plan works operationally, but on the quiet collapse of his priorities. Pattern interrupt. What if the first affair Rita suspects is completely wrong? She follows Dexter one night, expecting another woman, and instead sees him with Lumen in a rundown dockyard, faces tense, bodies close, adrenaline high. No plastic sheeting. no knives. Just two people sharing a secret she is not allowed to know. From Rita's angle, what else can it be? Now the chain reaction begins. Accusations about cheating. Demands for transparency. Couples therapy sessions where Dexter talks about stress and overwork while leaving out the part where he dismembers rapists. Along the way, Lumen becomes the emotional confidant Rita thinks she wants to be, but can't reach. In this video, we're going to keep tracking that collision course, because Dexter's idea is simple: balance his darkness through Lumen and his light through Rita. But the more he tries to keep them separate, the more their stories overlap in dangerous ways. And the next overlap doesn't look like an affair. It looks like a crime scene. Not Lumen's warehouse, the Morgan kitchen, the bedroom, the gaps in Dexter's story that Rita keeps tripping over. Because once Lumen walks away, the central question isn't, will Dexter be alone again? It's, who is he coming home as? In the original season 5, her departure is a clean emotional cut. The partnership ends, the mission is over, Dexter is isolated. Here, that same exit lands differently. Dexter doesn't just lose a dark ally, he gains a new secret history that exists entirely outside his marriage. He's coming back from torture sites and barrel dumps with the quiet satisfaction of a completed plan, and Rita has no idea that any of that psychology has been processed without her. To keep this clear, we need to sit with the logistics. While Miami Metro celebrates Jordan Chase's downfall, Dexter is in full operational cleanup mode. He's bleaching the last plastic, hauling the remaining evidence of the Barrel Girls case out to sea, rehearsing alibis between waves. Why was he gone that night? Why did he miss another counseling session? Why does his grief spike and then vanish at strange angles? He's juggling two investigations at once, the official one at work and the informal one at home, where Rita's eyes keep catching on every inconsistency. Stalk the target, erase the scene, patch the marriage. On paper, it's just another triad of control. But this is where the failure is relational, not operational. Dexter's lies hold, technically, the cover story's track. Yet when he walks through the door after Lumen leaves, he is lighter, calmer, almost relieved. And that emotional shift is exactly what Rita can't make sense of. She's still waking up to Trinity in the bathtub. She's still flinching when Harrison cries in the night. For her, the trauma is ongoing, raw, unresolved. For Dexter, the Barrel Girls arc has given him a private ritual of atonement, a narrative where he hunted predators who mirrored the man who almost destroyed his family. He has, in his own mind, made it right through blood. But he never lets Rita into that story, so she feels it as exclusion. As if they survived the same hurricane, but he secretly found higher ground with someone else. The focus is not just on what Dexter did with Lumen, but on what he didn't do with Rita. He didn't sit in the wreckage, didn't share the guilt, didn't let her see how deeply his code was implicated in Trinity ever finding them. Along the way, this confirms a pattern Rita can't yet name, but absolutely feels. In crisis, Dexter doesn't turn toward his family. He recruits a new accomplice. Leela, Miguel, Lumen, different faces, same trajectory. Every season that should push him into genuine intimacy instead drives him back into the dark, where he believes he's safest, where he believes he's most himself. And the end of this arc doesn't close the distance, it hardens it. One night, we land on a simple image. Rita awake in the half-light, Harrison between them, Dexter finally sleeping peacefully for the first time in weeks. She studies his face like a crime scene photo, looking for trace evidence of the man she almost lost. Who did she actually survive for? This husband, or the father Harrison needs? And if those aren't the same person, what happens the next time Dexter's piece comes from something she never sees? That question doesn't stay in the bedroom. That question doesn't stay in the bedroom. It follows them into car seats and crime scenes, into meetings and murder investigations, until season 6 turns it into something almost theological. On paper, Dexter's plan this season is elegant. Use the doomsday investigation as a controlled experiment. Crack Geller and Travis decode their apocalyptic tableau and test whether his dark passenger is fate, faith, or choice. Is he a monster written in blood from birth, or a man who can aim his darkness with something resembling free will? To keep this clear, he tells Rita it's simple: Trinity fallout, overwork, and a department stretched thin. Nightmares, not a spiritual crisis. In this video, we're going to sit with how completely that collapses once family life collides with revelation. Because every time Dexter thinks he's using the case starts using him. We see it in the mundane failures first. A school play where Astor scans the crowd for her dad and only finds Rita, holding 2 phones, lying for him in real time. A joint therapy session about Harrison's blood nightmares that Dexter forgets because he's busy photographing angel statues and studying Revelation verses at a crime scene. Parent-teacher conferences rescheduled, date nights canceled. Bedtime stories replaced by Dexter staring at grainy surveillance of Travis Marshall. The focus is not just on missed events, it's on Rita quietly absorbing the emotional labor Dexter keeps abandoning. She is processing Trinity. She is managing her own hypervigilance around bathtubs, doors, and late arrivals. She is watching Harrison for any sign that the blood he was found in did something permanent to his psychology. And along the way, she starts noticing a pattern. Ice truck. Bay Harbor butcher. Trinity. Now doomsday. Every major killer in Miami doesn't just stress Dexter out, it pulls him into a private obsession, a secret orbit that never fully includes her. The central question for Rita shifts. Is her husband just bad at boundaries? Or is he drawn to darkness in a way that goes beyond the job? When she hears him talk about Geller's belief with a strange, almost respectful curiosity, the room tilts. When she finds him up at 3 a.m., not with Harrison after a nightmare, but with open books on prophecy and sin, the gap between forensics nerd and something else widens. Dexter's own arc bends in the opposite direction. He flirts with the idea that his killing might have divine sanction, that the code Harry gave him was not just a coping mechanism, but a calling. Rita, meanwhile, is fighting to build meaning out of survival. She did not die in that bathtub. That has to mean something. For her, faith becomes about protection, healing, and keeping the family intact. For him, faith becomes another possible justification. Same word. Opposite trajectories. Each major section will show us a version of this. Operational investigation feeding relational decay, which then exposes existential failure. Season 6 is the marriage turning philosophical. And then we get the near miss. Rita stops by the station with Harrison, dropping off the lunch Dexter left on the counter. She follows a wrong hallway, a wrong open door, and almost steps into a church crime scene Dexter has subtly manipulated to frame Travis. Plastic residue. Missing piece of evidence. Religious imagery that doesn't match the man she thought she married. Dexter intercepts her at the threshold, smiling too fast, controlling the narrative by sheer reflex. She walks away, but not clean. She has seen enough to know his crisis of faith is more literal than he will ever admit. The next time she stumbles on something, will he reach her in time? Or will the marriage cross a line it cannot walk back from? Rita walks away from that church doorway with a question she can't name. Deb, in this version of the story, never even gets inside. And that tiny shift in timing rewires one of the most important collapses in Dexter's life. In the original timeline, We all remember the image. Travis Marshall on the altar, plastic gleaming. Dexter's knife mid-arc as Deb steps in. Husband, brother, monster all colliding in a single frame. Now imagine that same church with a still married Dexter, juggling not just his sister's horror, but Rita's expectation that her husband is at home, folding laundry, being the stable man she fought to believe in. The operational failure in the church becomes a domestic time bomb. Every minute Dexter spends with Travis is a minute Rita and Deb are both expecting him somewhere else. But with Rita alive, he never lets it get that far. To keep this clear, the central question for this section is, not does Deb find out, but how long can Dexter delay the exact kind of exposure we saw with Travis? In this video, we're going to treat that church as the plan he learns to avoid. A married Dexter is more cautious, more paranoid about his double life intersecting with Deb's investigation schedule and Rita's routines. He staggers his kills. He avoids holy spaces tied to active cases. He refuses to take the kind of theatrical risk that originally drew Deb straight to him. The reveal doesn't vanish. It drifts. It moves further down the season's trajectory, buying him time while quietly poisoning everything. Along the way, Deb starts to see what Rita already feels, the disappearances that never match the shift calendar, the uncanny way Dexter's hunches solve cases before evidence exists, the way certain files make him just a little too interested. Rita reads this through the psychology of a marriage. Is he cheating? Is he lying about Ah? Why does he come home smelling like the ocean at 3 a.m.? Deb reads the same pattern through a cop's lens. Why does my blood spatter guy keep showing up adjacent to the worst monsters in Miami? Why do his reports close doors instead of opening them? One woman suspects infidelity. The other suspects corruption. Neither is yet ready to imagine a code that sanctifies murder. Here's the pattern interrupt. Deb doesn't confront Dexter first. She opens his files. She cross-references old cases. She starts an off-the-books investigation that, ironically, looks a lot like the Bay Harbor Butcher Task Force, only this time the suspect is family. And she doesn't do it alone. The focus is not just on Deb's suspicion, but on the triangulation that forms when she vents to Rita. Little comments over coffee about Dexter's late nights. Rita, almost relieved, admits she's noticed the same thing. They form a quiet alliance, comparing notes on the man at the center of their lives, trying to explain the unexplainable, without yet touching the word killer. So when Deb finally sees Dexter kill, maybe not in a church, maybe in some anonymous warehouse she's tailed him to, she's not just watching her brother's mask drop. She's watching the man her sister-in-law has been desperately trying to trust turn into the confirmation of every doubt. The failure isn't confined to a single relationship anymore. It's a family-wide implosion, and the next section will follow how that blast wave hits Rita, Harrison, and every remaining illusion of control Dexter thought he had left. So when we roll into Season 7 in this timeline, Deb isn't the only one staring at Dexter differently. Rita is still here, still alive, and now the Trinity story isn't a tragic endpoint. It's an open wound. Let's kick things off with LaGuerta standing over that bloodslide from the Doomsday Killer Church. In the original season, the investigation points back to Bay Harbor Butcher as an abstract legend. Here, it loops through a living witness. Rita is the woman who survived the man who shattered Dexter's normal life narrative. And she's the one who heard him explain everything away as an addiction relapse. Every time LaGuerta pulls an old file, every time she revisits Kyle Butler or Trinity's pattern, Dexter isn't just worried about forensics. He's worried about Rita remembering what he told her and noticing what doesn't line up. To keep this clear, the operational risk and the domestic risk are now fused. LaGuerta's investigation presses on Bay Harbor. Rita, presses on the gaps in Dexter's story. Any inconsistency can travel from the dinner table to the evidence board in a single conversation. Into that pressure cooker walks Hannah McKay. In the original season, Dexter's attraction is about being seen by someone who shares his darkness. Here, the psychology is even sharper. Home is no longer a sanctuary, it's a house full of unspoken suspicion, a bathroom that still echoes with Trinity's almost victim, a wife who flinches when he disappears at night. Hannah becomes more than temptation. She's an exit door, a place where Dexter doesn't have to pretend the code is about protection instead of compulsion. The focus is not just on the affair as romance, but as a tactical miscalculation. Dexter thinks he can compartmentalize, outmaneuver LaGuerta, manage Hannah's volatility, and keep Rita in the dark. He juggles burner phones, late-night work calls, and hastily deleted texts, even as he's staging kills and scrubbing crime scenes. Each major section will show us the same pattern. He believes he's in control, then the variables multiply faster than he can track them. Rita's breaking point isn't a dramatic confession. It's something small. A florist receipt in his wallet with Hannah's name. A text that pops up while she's silencing his phone near Harrison's crib. Or a glimpse of Dexter in his car, parked with Hannah, silhouettes too close to be professional. She doesn't need the word serial killer to understand one thing. Her husband is betraying her again. And this time, there's no Lila, no vague addiction story to hide behind. The central question for Dexter becomes brutal in its simplicity. Is it safer to admit he's cheating than to risk any path that leads toward the kills? He scrambles for a cover story that sacrifices his marriage to protect the monster. And as he does, we end the Season 7 setup on a triple edge. LaGuerta quietly closes in on the Bay Harbor butcher. Rita quietly considers separation papers. Hannah, no longer content with stolen moments, quietly demands more of Dexter's loyalty. 3 fuses lit at once, all burning toward the same man. And the next section will have to ask which life explodes first. 3 fuses, 1 man, and 1 impossible equation. Because if Rita lives, Dexter doesn't just juggle a job and a dark passenger anymore. He's juggling 2 mutually exclusive futures that both demand to be the only one. Keep this clear. We have to see Rita and Hannah not as love interests, but as competing blueprints for Dexter's life. Rita is the plan he thinks he should want. The house, the kids, the backyard barbecues. A trajectory that looks almost moral from the outside. She is domestic stability, TA meetings, and the fantasy that Harrison will never see blood the way Dexter did. In this version, the code exists in the background as a private discipline, while the public story is, I'm a husband and father first. But watch what he actually does. Every late-night overtime shift, every lie about Kyle Butler, every unexplained absence during the Trinity investigation chips away at that stability. The more he clings to the image of normalcy, the more his operational failures leak into the home, missed anniversaries, suspicious injuries, emotional distance. He wants Rita to be proof that the monster can coexist with a family, yet his behavior keeps proving the opposite. Hannah is the inverse. She represents the life he secretly craves. No masks, no apologies, no need to pretend the dark passenger is a phase he'll outgrow. She shares his capacity for violence. She doesn't flinch at blood. She doesn't demand that he be better, only that he be honest. With her, the code stops being a leash and starts feeling like a shared language. If Rita is the sanctuary from his psychology, Hannah is the sanctuary inside it. In this video, we're going to lean into the central question. What happens when Dexter refuses to choose? His new plan is brutally simple and fatally arrogant. Keep Rita and Harrison as the public anchor, the evidence that he's trying to be good. While cultivating Hannah as a private future, he can pivot to the moment the marriage collapses. One life for the neighbors and La Huerta, another life waiting in the shadows. On paper, it sounds like control. In practice, each major step toward Hannah is a fresh crack in both identities. Protecting her from the law means tampering with evidence that La Huerta is already scrutinizing. Covering up her crimes means unexplained gaps in a schedule that Rita, already weighing separation papers, is perfectly positioned to notice. Every time he shields Hannah from an investigation, he risks exposing Kyle Butler, the code, and the Bay Harbor Butcher legacy. The focus is not just on the danger, but on the existential contradiction underneath. Dexter tells himself he's choosing between two futures, calibrating which self will win. In reality, he's refusing to fully commit to either. He will not give up the moral cover Rita provides, and he will not surrender the emotional honesty Hannah offers. That double refusal guarantees collapse. When the truth surfaces, Rita will see the monster she never believed in, and Hannah will see a man who never truly chose her. Both futures reject him, because the man at their center was always a split, unsustainable lie. And as those two worlds grind against each other, the next section has to ask, when La Huerta finally forces a reckoning, which version of Dexter steps forward? And who pays for that choice? So when La Huerta finally decides to force that reckoning, the central question stops being abstract. It walks straight into Dexter's kitchen. In this version of the story, she isn't chasing a ghost in file folders. She's circling a husband, a father, a man whose addiction history suddenly reads like an alibi that was a little too prepared. Let's kick things off with her psychology. La Huerta already lived through the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation, watched Dokes die branded as a monster, and watched Dexter slide through every net. Years later, the bloodslide at the church, the shipping records, the improbable coincidences all start to align. But with Rita still alive, she has one more data point, a documented past of Dexter lying about a compulsive urge, disappearing at night, and conveniently recovering just as the original case goes cold. To keep this clear, in her mind, Rita becomes the missing witness Dokes never had. So she does what good cops do. She knocks on the door. Polite smile. Warm tone. And then, the questions that are not really small talk at all. What was Dexter like back when the Bay Harbor Butcher case was active? Did he ever seem stressed about work? Any late nights that didn't make sense? Did he ever come home smelling like the ocean, like bleach, like something he couldn't quite explain? Each query is casual on the surface, but the pattern is razor sharp. Connect Dexter's emotional distance, his supposed recovery from addiction, and the exact window when the killing stopped. Rita answers, because why wouldn't she? She remembers the lies about the addiction, the rehab story, the way danger seemed to orbit Dexter without ever landing on him. And La Huerta carefully plants the seed. It's strange, isn't it, how men involved in major cases sometimes hold back, how secrets at work can bleed into the home. She never says Bay Harbor Butcher in that living room. She doesn't have to. The implication hangs there. Outside, Dexter is in operational panic. The plan used to be simple. Control the forensics, control the story. Now the investigation is inside his house, wearing his boss's badge and drinking his wife's coffee. He has to preempt the narrative, telling Rita that La Huerta is under pressure, that she's grasping at straws, that good people get questioned when cases collapse. Every explanation is a move to keep the code hidden. Every reassurance a new lie that tightens the noose. And Rita feels the split. Loyalty pulls one way, pattern recognition pulls the other. Why does danger always follow Dexter? Why did Trinity find them? Why did Kyle Butler exist at all? LaGuardia's suspicions don't create new fears. They give language to the ones Rita has been suppressing since season 4. Then, we hit the real pattern interrupt. The shipping container confrontation still comes. The investigation still converges, but it doesn't play out as we remember. Instead of Deb walking in alone on Dexter and LaGuardia, imagine Rita arriving first, shaken by what she's pieced together, demanding the truth. Deb follows, gun drawn, torn between her brother and her badge. 3 women, 1 monster, and a trajectory that now depends on which of them decides that the only way to regain control is to pull the trigger. So let's kick things off right where that powder keg leaves us. Not in a church with Travis Marshall, but in a rusted shipping container that has become the final audit of Dexter's entire double life. Concrete floor. Echoing footsteps. LaGuardia's voice cutting through the dark as she orders Dexter to drop whatever weapon she's sure he has. This is not a hunch anymore. This is an investigation that has reached its terminal point. In this version, LaGuardia hasn't just followed Bay Harbor butcher breadcrumbs. She's tracked a husband who keeps vanishing on the nights Miami's worst monsters quietly disappear. She lures Dexter here with a manufactured emergency, some story about new Bay Harbor evidence that implicates Deb. Deb follows, badge and gun, rehearsing the plan where she talks her way out of this, where control can still be negotiated. And outside, Rita's car screeches to a stop, the product of a different panic. Unanswered calls, a half-finished excuse, a trajectory she no longer believes. Inside, the confrontation plays out with surgical brutality. From LaGuardia laying out the bloodslide patterns to the boat, records to Dexter's proximity to Trinity, to Deb's increasingly frantic attempts to redirect, the central question is no longer, is Dexter the butcher? LaGuardia already knows. The question is, who is going to admit it first? Dexter can see the whole structure of his life collapsing in real time. If LaGuardia walks out, Rita and Harrison don't just lose a husband and father, they inherit the public legacy of a serial killer. To keep this clear, the focus is not just on the physical danger in the room, but on the psychology of exposure. Deb is trapped between her badge and her brother. Dexter is trapped between his code and his family. LaGuardia is trapped between career vindication and the very real possibility that neither Morgan will let her leave alive. Every line she speaks is another nail in the coffin of Dexter's illusion that he can keep these worlds separate. And then, at the worst possible moment, the container door rattles. A distant shout. Rita steps in, eyes adjusting, taking in 3 guns, 3 faces, and one reality she was never meant to see. She has already heard fragments through the metal walls. Bay Harbor butcher. Dokes was innocent. You framed him. Maybe a warning shot has already gone off, lodging in a crate, making Harrison's father flinch like any other man. This is where New Blood's fantasy of confession collides with the original series' machinery of denial. In the original timeline, Deb solves the problem for Dexter by killing LaGuardia, turning her own life into collateral. Here, Dexter's plan disintegrates. He has to choose in front of both women who define his competing identities. Kill LaGuardia while Rita watches, confirming every worst suspicion, or surrender, let the cuffs close, and watch his family become spectators at his moral autopsy. A gunshot echoes through the container. One body drops. We stay wide. We don't yet see whose trajectory just ended, or whose illusion of control finally, irreversibly, blew apart. The gunshot stops echoing. We cut in. It's LaGuardia on the floor, not Rita. Dexter's future as a free man survives the night. His double life does not. Because Rita has seen enough. The plastic. The knives. The way Dexter's face goes flat when he calculates who has to die for his plan to hold. She doesn't have language for dark passenger or code, but she has the one thing Dexter can't manage anymore: a coherent emotional reaction. Terror, disgust, and a dawning sense that her entire marriage was an investigation she never knew she was running. From there, Season 8 doesn't open on Deb alone in a dive bar. It opens on a household in slow collapse. Separate bedrooms. Harrison shuttled like evidence between parents. Whispered custody threats hanging in the air while breakfast gets made. Dexter trying to do normal dad things with a man who has just executed his captain in a shipping container and a wife who can't unsee the monster behind the smile. In this video, we're going to lean into that psychological crossfire. Because once Evelyn Vogel walks in, the question isn't just what's wrong with Dexter. The central question becomes, who gets labeled sick? And who is simply trying to survive proximity to someone whose entire life is structured around secret violence? To keep this clear, imagine Vogel's sessions as a rotating door. In canon, she frames Dexter as her successful experiment, the apex of Harry's design. Here, Rita is a wild card. Maybe she's dragged in under the language of family therapy, an anxious spouse in need of reassurance. Maybe Deb, already frayed from killing Lagerta, seeks Vogel out on her own, looking for a clinical way to name what Dexter is. Either way, the focus is not just on Dexter's brain, it's on the collateral psychology of living inside his story. Deb becomes the pivot. One day, she's on Dexter's couch with a drink, telling Rita that he's dangerous but manageable, that the code is a kind of control. The next, she's in Rita's kitchen, hands shaking, saying the only sane plan is to run, to take Harrison and leave Miami before the next body drops, with Dexter's fingerprints all over the circumstances, if not the scene. Is she enabling, or finally blowing up the fantasy of a safe serial killer husband? The show stops letting us pretend we can tell the difference. Meanwhile, bodies do keep dropping. The brain surgeon investigation still unfolds, but now every new crime scene is also a mirror. Dexter walks through blood spatter and bullet casings while privately drafting a new exit strategy, finish this one last case, neutralize the immediate threat, lock in some kind of stable future for Harrison. He's willing to lose the right to be a husband. He's halfway resigned to losing Deb as a sister. But he clings to the idea that he can still be a good father, as if those roles can be cleanly separated. And this is where therapy, instead of curing anything, becomes a scalpel that cuts away Dexter's last illusions. Vogel doesn't extinguish the dark passenger. She names it, historicizes it, and by doing so, forces Dexter and the audience to confront the real ledger of consequences. Harry's code didn't protect Rita. It didn't protect Deb. It didn't even protect Laguerta, the cop who tried to drag the truth into daylight. The more Dexter talks, the less defensible the narrative of necessary evil becomes. We watch him realize, in real time, that every safeguard he trusted was just another story he told himself. The ritual, the plastic, the rules about only killing killers, none of it stopped his family from becoming collateral. That's the existential failure of this altered Season 8. The investigation into Dexter's mind doesn't offer redemption. It strips away the last excuse that his violence could ever be contained. And once that excuse is gone, the next step in his trajectory isn't about staying hidden. It's about deciding who he's willing to sacrifice when hiding is no longer believable to anyone under his roof. So once hiding is no longer believable, we hit the one person Dexter can't outmaneuver with charm or forensics: Rita. The investigation turns inward. The crime scene is the marriage. And the central question becomes, what does a basically decent person do when she starts to suspect the father of her children is the source of the danger, not the shield against it? At first, Rita does what she's always done. she rationalizes. Late nights at work become big cases. The Kyle Butler mess becomes a misunderstanding. Harrison's near death in blood is filed under Trinity's evil, not Dexter's trajectory. We can imagine her replaying those moments in the kitchen, in the car, at 3 a.m., while nursing Harrison, trying to keep the fantasy of a normal suburban season alive. But denial has a half-life. Each new inconsistency, each unexplained cut, each dead acquaintance quietly chips away at the story she's been using to stay. To keep this clear, her journey isn't a sudden revelation. It's a slow, grinding loss of trust. First, she stops asking questions, because the answers never feel right. Then, she starts noticing patterns. Dexter vanishes when violence erupts, shows up calm when everyone else is shattered, reacts to blood with a technician's focus instead of a husband's horror. The plan to be married to a safe man collapses, not with a scream, but with a quiet, terrified thought, "My kids are not safe with him." From there, Rita's line in the sand is legal, not physical. She doesn't confront him in the living room. She consults a lawyer in a bland office park. She gathers bank statements, prints phone records, and begins documenting his absences like evidence in her own private case file. In this video, we're going to treat that as its own investigation. A parallel file to Miami Metro's, except the stakes are custody, not prison. Rita's new plan is survival through procedure, minimizing the risk of provoking a man she no longer fully understands. That leads straight into the custody battlefield. Dexter, who has framed his entire psychology around being a protector, cannot accept losing Harrison. So he pivots. He leans into the image, stable job, steady income, glowing character witnesses from the lab. He talks about routine, about providing, about continuity for the child. Meanwhile, Rita is trapped in a double bind. How much can she say? "Your Honor, I think my husband is connected to multiple homicides," sounds unhinged without hard proof, and could paint a target on her back if Dexter really is what she fears. Pattern interrupt. This is the first arena where Dexter's weapon isn't a knife, a code, or a kill room. It's paperwork. He starts planning depositions the way he planned abductions, mapping out testimonies, rehearsing reactions, even considering relocation if the court turns hostile. The focus is not just on winning, it's on preserving control over Harrison at any cost. And that's where the moral question cuts through the legal strategy. If Dexter truly loves his son, is the ethical move to let Rita take him and walk away, accepting the consequences of his own life's investigation? Or is the addiction to control so deep that even family court becomes just another crime scene to manipulate, pushing both of them toward a darker, more irreversible failure in the next phase of this story? If the custody hearing forces Dexter to confront what a good father actually looks like, Deb's arc forces us to ask something even messier. What does a good sister look like when your brother is a serial killer and your almost sister-in-law is one of his primary collateral victims? The central question for Deb stops being law versus Dexter. It becomes Dexter versus Rita. To keep this clear, we have to rewind to the church. In the original timeline, Deb walks in on Dexter killing Travis Marshall, and the investigation tightens around LaGuerta. Dexter has a plan: frame LaGuerta, discredit her, preserve the code. Instead, we watch Deb pull the trigger on her own boss to save him. That single gunshot is Deb's moral collapse. In our version, that collapse now has a witness she can't face. Rita, still alive, still believing in the man Deb just protected. Suddenly, LaGuerta's body on the floor isn't just a career-ending secret. It's the reason Rita will never know how close the truth came. Deb knows she chose Dexter over justice, over the department, and, by extension, over every woman Dexter touches. So when Rita is spiraling from half-truths about Trinity, the Kyle Butler investigation, and Dexter's disappearances, Deb's guilt metastasizes. She's not just watching a victim. She's watching a victim she helped create. This is where Deb's psychology fractures into a triangle. One part of her is the Deb we remember from later seasons, ride or die, willing to torch evidence, sabotage the investigation, take the hit so Dexter can keep killing under the code. Another part wants to grab Rita, Harrison, and Astor, throw them in a car, and drive until Miami is a memory. And buried underneath is a third impulse that whispers, walk into Miami Metro. Confess to Laguerta's murder, and let the entire fade collapse. Along the way, that internal war leaks into every confrontation. We can imagine Deb unloading on Dexter in a way the original series only brushed against, telling him he ruins every woman's life he touches, listing names like an indictment: Rita, Leela, Lumen, Hannah, while knowing she's the one who turned Laguerta into a corpse to keep the pattern going. Then, in a brutal reversal, she snaps at Rita for not leaving fast enough, accusing her of denial, when what she's really seeing is her own inability to cut ties with her brother. In this video, we're going to treat Deb as the true wild card of this altered trajectory. Her drinking escalates, the pills blur her judgment, and every scene she's in becomes a live wire. Does she crash her car with Dexter in the passenger seat to save him from arrest? Does she walk into a squad room and start talking about a shipping container, a church, a marina? The focus is not just on whether Dexter's plan holds, but on whether Deb's next emotional swing detonates everything first. Because if Rita ever corners Deb with the right question at the wrong time, the person who finally exposes Dexter might not be a cop, or a killer, or a rival. It might be the only person who loves him enough to destroy him. So now we arrive at the real experiment in this alternate timeline, Harrison. In the original story, his life begins as a mirror image of Dexter's, a baby screaming on a blood-soaked floor beside his dead mother. Here, the image fractures. There is still blood. There is still chaos, but Rita is upright, breathing, clinging to him. The trauma doesn't vanish. The narrative around it mutates. Instead of a single origin story, Mom died, Dad failed. Harrison grows up with two competing explanations for what danger means. Rita frames that night as survivable horror. Bad things happen, but the people who love you can pull you out. Dexter, locked into the psychology of the dark passenger, quietly reads the same scene as proof that blood is destiny. One event. Two stories. One child trying to live inside both. To keep this clear, we have to zoom in on the day-to-day arrangement. Shared custody, alternating weekends. Harrison shuttled between a modest house where Mom is always tired but present, and a carefully staged bachelor space where Dad is attentive, playful, and mysteriously unavailable 3 nights a week. Why doesn't Daddy live at home anymore? Rita's answer leans on betrayal and secrecy. Dexter's leans on grown-up problems and the idea that he left to keep them safe. Both are evasions. Both are plans to control the narrative. Along the way, those evasions harden into quiet campaigns. Rita drops hints that people can look perfect and still hurt you. Dexter counters with stories about second chances and how sometimes the system fails, so good people have to make hard choices. Each bedtime story, each offhand comment in the car becomes a tiny investigation into the other parent's character. Harrison learns early that love and suspicion can live in the same room. Then the early signs start. A schoolyard fight where Harrison doesn't start swinging, but once he does, he doesn't stop. An eerie calm when another kid breaks an arm on the playground, while everyone else panics. a fascination with crime stories, especially the parts about motive and evidence. Rita sees trauma, a child rehearsing danger, because he never really left that bathroom. Dexter sees reflection, a child whose inner world might be shaped by the same dark currents he spent a lifetime naming and managing. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to that tug of war over meaning. The focus is not just on what Harrison does, but on which parent's fear gets to define it. Rita pushes for therapy, for naming the wound. Dexter pushes for structure, for a junior version of the code without ever calling it that. One is trying to heal a break. The other is trying to channel it. The central question becomes chilling. What happens when Harrison realizes both of them are lying? Not in one explosive reveal, but through a drip feed of overheard arguments, half-buried police reports, and the strange way adults in Miami PD go quiet when his father's name comes up. At some point, he stops asking why Daddy doesn't live at home and starts asking what else they've both been hiding. That is the seed of a new blood era, reckoning far more volatile than the one we actually got. Because this Harrison isn't just confronting a monster father, he's confronting an entire childhood built on two incompatible versions of the truth. That tension between two stories about the same father brings us straight to New Blood, because once Rita survives, the original lumberjack escape stops working on every level. In the timeline we know, Dexter can vanish into a storm and a logging camp because there is no one withstanding to drag him back into court, into a custody battle, into an investigation about abandonment. But if Rita is alive, lawyered up, and already furious that his secret life brought Trinity into their home, the central question isn't would Dexter run, it's how could he possibly disappear without detonating his own legal reality. Faking his death isn't just selfish, it's potentially criminal. Insurance fraud, child support evasion, obstruction if anyone links Kyle Butler to Trinity. The plan collapses the second we imagine Rita testifying that her husband has a history of lies, late nights, and proximity to serial murder. So to keep this clear, we have to reimagine the escape itself. No grand storm martyrdom, no clean break. Instead, Dexter engineers a smaller disappearance, a quieter identity shift. Maybe he leverages a case, a supposed threat, some half-true story about needing to go into protective custody. He becomes Jim Lindsay years earlier, but not as a ghost. As a man who is technically relocated, sends just enough money to avoid court, and maintains a drip feed of contact that never quite answers the questions Rita and Harrison are really asking. Rita, caught between fear and denial, passes that ambiguity down. Harrison doesn't grow up with a myth of a father who died a hero in a storm. He grows up with a story that never quite adds up. A phone call on birthdays that cuts out. An email with no return address. A mother who says your father had to go away, but flinches when he asks, did he choose to leave us? That's not tragic closure. That's psychological sandpaper. And along the way, that friction shapes a very different Harrison. Instead of idolizing a dead hero, he fixates on a living absence. He digs into old case files, Googles Kyle Butler, finds grainy photos of his dad at Miami Metro crime scenes. The investigation isn't who killed my mom. It's who is this man who walked away after almost getting her killed. By the time he tracks Dexter to Iron Lake, he isn't a lost boy looking for a ghost. He's a teenager confronting a man whose pattern of control and escape has already defined his entire trajectory. Imagine that first meeting in the shop. Not awe, not subconscious recognition, just cold, simmering anger. You left. You knew we existed, and you still built a new life. Suddenly, New Blood isn't a mystery about whether this stranger is Dexter Morgan. It's a reckoning where both Rita and Harrison have active claims on the truth. emails, custody records, maybe even an old therapist who heard Rita confess that she suspected something darker. Now, Dexter isn't just hiding from past crimes. He's hiding from a living paper trail and two people he can't frame as tragic casualties. Any attempt to start over is doomed from the start, because the one variable he never controlled was a son determined not to be gaslit by another version of the story. And that sets up an endgame, where exposure can come from a courtroom, a kill table, or a family dinner. And Dexter has no clean exit from any of them. And that's the trap Dexter walks into in Iron Lake, believing distance is the same thing as change. No Miami skyline, no blood slides, no family dinners with Rita, just snow, isolation, and a carefully constructed routine that looks, on the surface, like control. Let's kick things off with that routine. Dexter's plan in New Blood is brutally simple. No killing, no code, no investigations. He clocks in at a small-town hunting shop, flirts with the local cop, and memorizes every trigger he has to avoid. No knives that feel too right in his hand. No late-night drives on empty roads. No alcohol-fueled confessions. The entire lifestyle is a behavioral perimeter, a quarantine for the dark passenger built on the fantasy that if he starves it long enough, it will die. To keep this clear, Iron Lake isn't a moral awakening. It's an operational pivot. Dexter is still thinking like a technician managing risk, not a person processing consequences. The central question for him is not, how do I atone? It's, how do I avoid another Rita? Except in this version, Rita is still out there. She's not a ghost or a bathtub symbol. She's a living, legal reality. We can imagine the file, custody agreements, supervised visits, maybe even a restraining order born from years of unexplained disappearances and emotional stonewalling. Every few months, there's a terse phone call about Harrison's grades, a lawyer's email about missed support, a voicemail where Rita's voice is tired rather than tragic. Dexter tells himself that physical distance has severed the old life, but bureaucratic paper trails say otherwise. And then Harrison shows up, violating that fragile border in the most literal way. This isn't just a genetic question about darkness walking through the snow. Harrison brings Rita's version of Dexter with him. Stories of the absent father who had problems, of the husband who left without explanation, of the man Miami knows as a dead coworker rather than a vanished monster. The persona Dexter built in Iron Lake, quiet, helpful, almost quaint, doesn't line up with the fractured. Angry myth Harrison has been raised on. Which one is real? In this video, we're going to track how Dexter's psychology contorts to answer that. His new rationalization is almost heroic in his own head. If he can be a better father now, if he can guide Harrison away from the dark passenger, then maybe the abandonment, the lies to Rita. The emotional napalm he dropped on Miami all retroactively become necessary sacrifices. He's still chasing a legacy. Still convinced that if the end state looks good, the trajectory that got him there will be forgiven. But Iron Lake isn't a fresh start. It's a pressure cooker. Every unresolved failure, Rita's distrust, Deb's breakdown, LaGuerta's investigation, the Bay Harbor butcher mythology, condenses into the expectations resting on Harrison's shoulders. And as Dexter doubles down on this final plan to be good, we have to ask, what happens when Harrison refuses to play the role his father wrote for him? So when we follow that pressure into the nuts and bolts of Dexter's operations, the illusion of control gets even thinner. From Miami Metro conference rooms to Iron Lake snowbanks, every major plan he builds to contain the darkness ends up leaking, faster, messier, and far more visibly, because Rita is still there to see the cracks. To keep this clear, Let's kick things off with the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation. Dexter's original fantasy is simple: meticulous kills, perfect dumps, blood slides as trophies that only he will ever read. The investigation turns all of that into evidence. In our version, Rita is not a tragic memory. She's in that house as the news cycle explodes, watching her husband come home from the same department, hunting the butcher. Every late night at the lab, every missing shirt, every small lie now lands in a marriage that's already strained by Trinity and Kyle Butler. The central question for her becomes unavoidable. Why does danger always orbit this man? Season 3, Miguel's rogue killings were already an operational failure. Dexter thought he could franchise the code, control a partner, and still protect his cover. Instead, Miguel improvises, escalates, and forces Dexter into a cleanup campaign. With Rita alive, that campaign has a witness. She sees Miguel at family dinners, hears the stories about his stress, then watches Dexter spiral as the Prado investigation heats up. The focus is not just on what Dexter does to contain Miguel, but on how many different versions of himself he has to maintain in the same week. Husband, father, blood analyst, secret mentor, silent executioner. Trinity is where the operational and domestic failures collide. Dexter's Kyle Butler cover, his surveillance, his misread of Trinity's psychology, every step is a miscalculation. In canon, Rita's death is the brutal punctuation mark. Here, she survives, but the investigation into Trinity's stalking of their family digs up Kyle Butler as a person of interest. Now Rita is in interviews describing this friend Dexter never mentioned. LaGuerta quietly clocks it. That same pattern repeats with Lumen. The evidence trail from the Barrel Girls case intersects with Rita's therapy timeline as she tries to process repeated brushes with serial predators. One victim's healing schedule crosses another victimizer's cleanup schedule. By the time we reach LaGuerta's Bay Harbor Butcher case and the Iron Lake slip-ups, the pattern is undeniable. Dexter keeps assuming he can juggle everything: Deb's breakdown, Rita's suspicions, Hannah's reappearance, Harrison's needs, overlapping investigations, by adding just one more lie, one more contingency, one more body. But Rita's ongoing presence gives LaGuerta leverage, a living spouse who can testify about his absences during key murders, his strange calm around violence, his history with Trinity. And in New Blood, those small operational errors, the screw with Matt Caldwell, the clumsy deer cover story, don't just draw Angela's suspicion. They ricochet back to a lifetime of near misses Rita has never fully accepted. Operationally, Rita living doesn't save Dexter. It slows the collapse, stretches it out, and forces every failed plan to play out in front of the one person he most wants to believe the myth. We don't get a cleaner trajectory. We get a longer, clearer look at how fragile his control always was. And once we see that, we have to move from logistics to loyalty. Because if the operations are failing in plain sight, how long do the people around him keep choosing to stay? If operations are already cracking in front of Rita, Deb, and Harrison, then we have to ask the central question: what does Dexter actually do in his relationships when control starts slipping? Because once Rita survives Trinity, we don't get a tragic monument to his double life. We get a living, breathing investigation into every lie he's ever told. To keep this clear, we can map the core connections the show orbits around. Rita is no longer the martyred wife in a blood-filled bathtub. She's a survivor, a spouse, a witness who can remember the night he came home too late and the way his stories never quite line up. Deb is still the sister and eventual co-conspirator, the one whose love keeps colliding with her training as a cop. Harrison is the son and potential mirror, the child Dexter keeps trying to steer away from the darkness he won't stop feeding. Then we have Lumen and Hannah, the dark confidantes who see pieces of the monster and mistake selective honesty for intimacy. In this video, we're going to lean in to how Rita's survival changes the emotional ledger. In the original trajectory, her death freezes her as the ultimate consequence, a fixed point Dexter can point to and say, "This is why I have to change," without ever having to face her changing. Here, she doesn't become a symbol. She becomes an evolving person who can withdraw affection, set boundaries, ask follow-up questions, and eventually tell Harrison her version of events. Instead of a shrine, Dexter has a witness stand at his dinner table. And that's where his pattern of relational planning really shows up. Dexter doesn't just lie, he curates access. He gives Rita the damaged addict story, Deb the overworked blood guy story, Lumen the righteous partner story, Hannah the soulmate who finally sees me story. Each half-truth is a little control mechanism, a way to keep them close without ever letting them compare notes. He mistakes compartmentalization for care. If they don't see the whole of him, he thinks, they can't be hurt. In reality, that's the psychology of control, not protection. Rita's decision to pursue divorce after Trinity is the first big relational failure. The plan was, keep her in the dark, keep her safe. Instead, she refuses the role of grateful suburban wife and starts asking why danger keeps circling their family. Deb, facing the Bay Harbor butcher files, and later the church with Travis Marshall, has her own fracture point. Expose him and honor the badge, or protect him and live with the consequences. Harrison's confrontation in New Blood is the end of that arc. He doesn't just inherit trauma, he rejects the script entirely, calling out the gap between the code and the bodies. Pattern interrupt for Dexter. What if nobody plays along anymore? Each major section will show someone stepping out of the box he built for them. Relationally, his greatest failure isn't the people he kills. It's his refusal to let anyone love the whole of him, which guarantees that every bond will eventually collapse under the weight of what he withholds. And once we see that collapse, we have to ask what fills the vacuum. If the lies fail and the roles break, what's left of Dexter's identity at all? When we strip away the roles and the lies, we're left with the raw bargain Harry sold him. Follow the code. Only kill those who deserve it. In return, you get to live a normal life, a family life, right alongside the darkness. No innocent blood. No harm to the people you love. In this video, we're going to treat that as what it always was. Not a safeguard, but a myth. Because in the Rita Lives timeline, the central question isn't whether Dexter can keep killing. It's whether Harry's promise can survive the one thing the code never accounted for, collateral damage that doesn't die, but keeps waking up next to you every morning. Picture the bathroom in Season 4. Harrison crying in blood. Rita not in a body bag, but in a hospital bed, lungs full of water, eyes full of questions. Dexter's plan was simple. Isolate Trinity, finish the ritual, come home to the perfect cover story. Control the monster, protect the family, preserve the fantasy. Instead, the Dark Passenger invites Trinity into his house, into Rita's world, and almost gets her killed precisely because Dexter tried to have it both ways. To keep this clear, Rita's survival is not a reprieve. It's evidence. She is hurt not in spite of the code, but because of it. The investigation into Kyle Butler, the near miss at Arthur's house, the constant disappearances, all of it converges on that bathtub. Harry promised that if Dexter followed the rules, the people he loved would be safe. Rita's trauma is the clearest refutation we could ask for. And yet, psychologically, Dexter still clings to the story that he's a monster incapable of real feeling. That's the armor. If he's empty, then attachment is an illusion, and losing people is just data. But his behavior keeps betraying him. He risks exposure to save Deb from Brian. He rearranges his entire routine for Rita's kids. He holds Harrison like a lifeline. These are not the moves of a hollow predator. These are the moves of a man who feels, then endangers what he feels through his choices. Along the way, the show keeps handing him exit ramps. Trinity's attack on his family. La Guerta standing over the Bay Harbor butcher evidence with moral clarity he will never have. Vogel calling the code an experiment, not a religion. Harrison's arrival in Iron Lake, a literal replay of blood and abandonment. Each major section of his life presents the same fork: stop, confess, surrender, or double down on control. Existentially, his greatest failure is that he always doubles down. He will not accept that he cannot be both what he is and what he wants to be without destroying the very people he claims to protect. With Rita alive, that contradiction doesn't fade into a tragic backstory. It sits at his kitchen table, flinching when he's late, watching him through the cracks in his mask. So where does a man go when the code fails, the myth collapses, and the family he protects becomes his living indictment? So if Rita is still alive at that kitchen table, flinching and watching, we have to ask the central question. Did Harry's code ever protect her in any meaningful way? Or did it just give Dexter a script to justify the damage? To keep this clear, let's kick things off with what the code claims to do. Only kill those who slip through the justice system. Never get caught. Never let the monster touch your family. Always clean up the mess. On paper, it's elegant, a closed loop of violence that supposedly never leaks into the normal world. Stalk the target, confirm the victims, prepare the kill room, leave no evidence. The fantasy is that if the plan is flawless, the consequences stay contained. Now put those rules next to Rita's actual trajectory. Before Dexter, she's already escaping Paul, an abusive ex who weaponizes control and fear. With Dexter, she survives a serial killer attack by the ice truck killer, becomes a pawn in Leela's manipulation, and lives through years of gaslighting around his addiction to work, to stress, to anything but what it really is. Season after season, she feels the darkness, but never gets to see its shape. She hears the lies, but not the code behind them. In this video, we're going to track how that gap between intention and outcome lands on her body and her psychology. Because the focus is not just on whether Dexter kills bad people, it's on what it means to share a bed with someone whose entire identity is an ongoing crime scene. The code says, never let the monster touch your family. But what if the touch isn't a knife? It's a lie repeated 1,000 times. That's the blind spot. Harry built a system that treats family as a fixed variable, something you can shield with secrecy and distance. As long as Dexter keeps the kill room separate from the nursery, the code considers the mission accomplished. It never accounts for what it does to a person to live inside a permanent investigation they're not allowed to name. The fear when he disappears, the confusion when his stories don't track, the low-level dread that something is wrong, but every attempt to surface it gets smoothed over. Rita's therapy becomes the evidence Harry never wanted collected. Her sessions about Paul, about trust, about why she keeps ending up with men who vanish or explode, show that the pattern isn't random. Even without knowing about the blood slides or the plastic wrap, she's tracing the outline of Dexter's choices. The code tells him he's cleaning up the mess. Her recovery shows us he is the mess. So if Harry's true goal was to protect innocents like Rita, what would a functional code have looked like? Not marry her and lie better. Not compartmentalize harder. The only rule with any chance of success is the one Harry never formalizes. You don't get a family. You don't build a life that can be collateral. And the tragedy is that both Harry and Dexter break that rule, each pretending the other one didn't. And with Rita alive, That broken rule doesn't stay theoretical, it has to play out, day after day, in every choice Dexter makes next. Because once Rita is alive in that bathroom, the broken rule isn't philosophical anymore. It's logistical. It's calendar invites, court dates, and midnight kills, all trying to occupy the same 24 hours. Let's kick things off by unpacking what Dexter's double life already demands before we add Rita's survival. Night is for hunting, surveillance, stalking, plastic, kill rooms, disposal. Day is for the blood-spattered job, where every new investigation is a potential audit of his own work. Then we layer on husband and father, school events, bedtime routines, intimacy he has to fake but also manage convincingly. Around that, a constant swirl of cover stories, phone lies, and late nights at the lab. And underneath it all, an exhausting discipline of emotional compartmentalization, walling off the dark passenger so no stray reaction gives him away. To keep this clear, Dexter's life is already a pressure cooker before Trinity. The code is supposed to be his pressure valve, but with Rita alive, the valve jams. Now he's not just the man who lost his wife, he's the man whose wife survived a serial killer and has questions. Rita's survival adds an entire second shift. Trauma recovery means she needs him present, not just physically, but emotionally. Therapy sessions where she talks about fear, violation, trust, while Dexter sits 3 feet away, hiding the fact that he is another predator in her life. Legal battles with Trinity fallout, victim compensation, maybe even testifying. Co-parenting logistics ramp up, childcare during hearings, safety plans, locks, alarms, all of it demanding a husband who can reassure and protect. How does a man who schedules murders between work and dinner also schedule couples counseling? Here's the pattern interrupt. In this video, we're going to stop pretending Dexter's problem is that he becomes sloppy. The central question is whether any human being could maintain this level of sustained deception without a catastrophic failure. Every season adds more plates to spin. Miguel and the Code as a shared project. Lumen and a full-blown vigilante partnership. Hannah and a romantic bond with someone who actually sees him. LaGuerta's investigation, Vogel's experiments, Iron Lake's small-town scrutiny. The trajectory isn't random, it's cumulative overload. And along the way, the mask keeps thinning. Rita almost walking into his bloody aftermath with Brian. Deb nearly catching him in the act with Travis in the church. Harrison asking why Daddy is always gone at night. Each near miss is a stress fracture in the fade, evidence that the system is overclocked. With Rita alive, those fractures form faster, because she's no longer a passive background character. She's an active observer, a victim learning to scan for danger. The focus is not just on Dexter's operational risk, but on the psychology of pretending this is sustainable. The collapse isn't inevitable because he is careless by nature. It's inevitable because the plan requires inhuman consistency in a human environment. Rita, living long enough to push back to demand presence, simply accelerates the timetable on a breakdown that was always coming. And the next phase of that breakdown is simple. Once the pressure exceeds capacity, something has to give, either the killing, or the family, or the lie itself. Once that pressure hits, Dexter doesn't just misjudge his schedule or his kill room logistics. He misjudges people. The real collapse isn't just operational, it's relational. And Rita surviving Trinity becomes the ultimate stress test of Dexter's blind spot. He thinks the people closest to him are fixed props in a plan, not moving pieces with their own trajectories. To keep this clear, look at his core casting. Rita is the fragile cover. Deb is the loyal cop sister. Harrison is the blank slate. In Dexter's psychology, they're roles, not agents. He believes Rita will always need protection, Deb will always back him, and Harrison will either repeat his trauma or be safely molded by the code. The focus is not just on what he hides from them, but on what he refuses to see in them. Rita living through Trinity shatters that illusion quietly at first. She survives the bathroom, survives the investigation, survives the realization that Kyle Butler was real and lived disturbingly close to her husband's double life. Therapy stops being a bandage and starts becoming a lens. Each near death, each inconsistency in Dexter's stories sharpens her instincts. He assumes she'll never connect the dots between the danger orbiting their family and his constant disappearances. But how many dead neighbors, secret apartments, and late-night absences can you survive before you start an investigation of your own? In this video, we're going to lean into that miscalculation. Because once Rita starts asking, why does death follow us? Dexter's plan of using her as emotional camouflage fails. She is no longer the fragile shield. She's a resilient, intelligent witness whose suffering has a memory. He makes the same error with Deb, just in a different direction. Dexter counts on her loyalty as if it's an inexhaustible resource. He believes, almost as a law of nature, that Deb will choose him over the badge, over the truth, over herself. But a living Rita changes the cost of that choice. It's one thing for Deb to cover for her brother when the victims are abstract names on a board. It's another when her grieving, traumatized sister-in-law is sitting across from her, asking why the universe keeps punishing this family. How long can Deb absorb that guilt before her mind, already fraying in the original timeline, starts to split under the weight of the lie? Then there's Harrison. Dexter projects his own origin story straight onto that crib. Blood, trauma, dark passenger, destiny. But with Rita alive, Harrison's anger has a different center of gravity. It's not just about what he saw. It's about what he was told after. Two parents insisting on normal while the house smells like secrets. What if Harrison's rage is less genetic curse and more the accumulated consequence of being lied to by everyone he loves? And that's the central question this what if exposes. Dexter's most human flaw isn't the urge to kill. It's the need to believe he already knows the people he loves, that he can predict them, manage them, fold them into his code. Along the way, that need for control blinds him to their evolution until their choices ambush him. Rita's suspicions, Deb's breaking point, Harrison's rebellion, these aren't random shocks. They're the inevitable outcome of being misread for years, which raises a darker possibility. If Dexter finally realizes they're changing faster than he can manage, does he adjust the plan, or does he choose a more terrifying form of control? So, let's kick things off by naming the loop we've been circling. Dexter feels his secret wobble, sketches a new plan to stabilize it, misreads the person in front of him, and the result is more blood on the floor or more damage in the living room. Different seasons, different costumes, same trajectory. With Rita alive, that loop doesn't disappear. It gets an extra variable. Every new containment strategy has to run through her. Trinity's bathtub becomes a therapy office instead of a crime scene. Instead of a corpse, Dexter comes home to a shaking wife, a crying baby, and a detective's questions about why Kyle Butler was anywhere near their lives. The investigation doesn't end at Mitchell. It bleeds into their marriage. To keep this clear, watch how the pattern replicates. In Season 4, Dexter thinks he can shadow Trinity, learn from him, then cleanly remove him. He underestimates Trinity's agency and loses Rita in the original timeline. In our version, he still underestimates Trinity, but the loss mutates. Rita survives, and now demands explanations, boundaries, honesty. Dexter responds not with vulnerability, but with a refined cover story. Another layer of the code, protecting him from intimacy instead of violence. That same loop plays out with Miguel. Miguel is Dexter's first real test run of a shared secret, a powerful friend brought into the circle, then treated as an unruly asset to manage. Dexter assumes he can calibrate Miguel's rage, impose the code, and pull back control when needed. Miguel refuses to be managed, the plan collapses, and Dexter ends up killing the one person he thought might understand him. Rita, watching from the outside, sees only mood swings and late nights, never the psychology underneath. Lumen is the same architecture, in a different key. Trauma survivor, shared mission, temporary honesty. Dexter believes he can compartmentalize, husband and father in the daylight, avenging angel with Lumen at night. He again underestimates her agency. She heals, she leaves, and he's left explaining away emotional absences to a wife who knows something is wrong, but keeps getting stonewalled. The focus is not just on who swings the knife, but on who gets shut out of the truth. Anna upgrades the experiment. Now the dark partnership is explicit. No more pretending he's the only monster in the room. Yet even then, Dexter clings to control, plotting escape routes and backup identities without fully committing to the life Hannah offers. Iron Lake is the final iteration, a test run for quitting where the suspicious sheriff replaces LaGuerta, and Harrison replaces Deb as the person who sees through him. Same loop. New faces. Visually, the show keeps echoing itself. Trinity's bathtub and Rita's therapy sessions, LaGuerta's parking lot hunches, and Angela Bishop scrolling through old Bay Harbor files. Deb's breakdown in the shipping container, and Harrison's confrontation in the snow. Each pairing is a mirror, reflecting the same failure, when forced to choose between control and vulnerability. Dexter always reaches for control, and that choice poisons whatever he claims to protect. Which leaves us with the central question for the endgame. If Rita never dies, does that instinct finally crack, or does he simply build a bigger, more fragile lie around her? So let's kick things off by going straight at the myth Dexter keeps selling us. From episode 1, his voiceover is a manifesto of control. He's the meticulous planner, the apex predator, the man who can divide his life into clean compartments. Stalk the target, confirm the victims, prepare the kill room, leave no evidence. According to Dexter, everything is a plan, and every plan bends to his will. But when we actually track his trajectory, the central question isn't how did he lose control? It's whether he ever had it in the first place. Because the big inflection points of his life are not the ones he designs, they're the ambushes he survives. Rita in the bathtub, Deb walking into the church, LaGuerta connecting Bay Harbor butcher evidence to him, Harrison showing up in Iron Lake after a decade of exile. Each of these is an event that detonates outside his control, driven by other people's choices, other people's investigations, other people's psychology. To keep this clear, we can hold Dexter's self-narration in one hand and the actual record in the other. He says he's a master compartmentalizer. Yet Rita's attack by Trinity is the direct consequence of his failure to anticipate that a serial killer might retaliate. He believes Harry's code is an airtight system, yet Deb's discovery of him with Travis Marshall is pure chance. She walks in at the worst possible second. He imagines he can vanish and reinvent himself. Yet Harrison's arrival in Iron Lake proves that the past doesn't respect his exit strategy. Now we flip the key variable. Rita lives. Suddenly, the illusion of control doesn't just crack in a single traumatic tableau, it erodes in slow motion. The one scenario Dexter never plans for is the survivor. What happens when the person he endangers lives long enough to notice the pattern? The late nights, the lies about work, the way death keeps orbiting their family. In this video, we're going to treat that as the stress test for his entire system. Because a living Rita is not just a spared victim. She's an ongoing investigation in yoga pants, quietly collecting data on her husband. Here's the pattern interrupt. Dexter's story stops being about whether he can hide bodies and starts being about whether he can hide cause and effect. Rita's questions, Deb's suspicions, Harrison's trauma, all of that forces him to confront something he's been dodging since childhood. He doesn't control the consequences, he only reacts to them. And that's the psychological core. Dexter needs the control myth to justify killing. If he admits he's at the mercy of other people's reactions, Rita's fear, Deb's disgust, Harrison's anger, then Harry's code stops being a protective rulebook and becomes what it always was, a permission slip with a body count. The focus is not just on his operational failures, but on the moral collapse that follows when the people around him refuse to stay in their assigned boxes. By the time we reach Iron Lake, the pattern is undeniable. He isn't orchestrating a perfect double life. He's improvising in the ruins of each failed plan, telling himself the next adjustment will finally restore order. Rita's continued presence in this alternate timeline doesn't change who he is. It just removes his last excuse not to see it. Which raises the question our next section has to confront. What happens when the people he's been improvising around finally stop playing along? So, when the people around Dexter finally stop playing along, what are we actually left with? Not a single dramatic fall from grace, but a messy catalog of possible endings, each one exposing a different fracture in the identity he's been rehearsing since Harry first named the Dark Passenger. To keep this clear, we can sketch 4 main endpoints for this alternate trajectory. First, the Lagerta investigation hits pay dirt, and Dexter ends up imprisoned, his code dissected in court instead of on Vogel's couch. Second, he dies in a confrontation sparked not by a random killer, but by Rita or Deb refusing to be collateral damage anymore. Third, we land in a warped version of Iron Lake, Dexter exiled, Harrison alive but emotionally distant, their bond poisoned by years of lies that Rita never stopped questioning. And finally, a quieter but almost crueler outcome. He stays alive, technically free, but legally and emotionally cut off from his family. In each scenario, the labels Dexter clings to don't hold. As a husband, the investigation into Kyle Butler, Trinity, and every unexplained absence has already broken Rita's trust. She may not know every detail, but she knows enough to see that the man who tucks in her kids is also the man who keeps detonating their life. As a father, he's both comfort and threat, the one who rescues Harrison from danger and the one who keeps inviting danger into the house in the first place. How do you hug someone whose psychology you now suspect might have gotten you all killed? As a monster, he fails on his own terms. The code was supposed to prevent innocent deaths, yet in this version, Rita survives only to endure years of fear, half-truths, and legal fallout directly generated by his plans. Every season adds another body, another cover story, another night where he chooses the table over the dinner table. Even when he tries for redemption, the consequences don't reset, they accumulate. Lumen leaves, Hannah poisons, Deb unravels, and Rita is still there, forced to witness the long, slow collapse rather than vanishing in one brutal tableau. And that's the central question this timeline throws at us. What if Dexter never gets the clean, tragic, anti-hero narrative the original show offered him? No single catastrophic loss he can frame as fate. No blood-filled bathtub to point to and say, "This is why I am the way I am." Instead, he's condemned to live through an extended series of smaller losses, custody hearings, restraining orders, Harrison's resentment, Rita's exhausted distance that can't be ritualized or wrapped in plastic. Even if he dies or ends up behind bars, Rita and Harrison's stories keep going. Along the way, they rebuild themselves around contested memories. Dexter as protector, Dexter as abuser. Dexter as necessary evil in a world they wish had never needed him. There is no final state, only versions of Dexter refracted through the people he's damaged. Which leaves one last problem we haven't tackled yet. If there's no stable ending for him, what does that do to everyone still trying to live in the wreckage he left behind? If there's no stable ending for Dexter, then changing one early fracture point doesn't just tweak the finale, it rewires the entire chain of damage. And Rita's survival after Trinity is the one change that quietly reaches into every death that follows and asks, did this really have to happen? Let's kick things off by tracing the immediate divergences. In the original timeline, Rita's body in that blood-filled bathtub collapses Dexter's fantasy of a safe double life, brands Harrison with the same trauma that made Dexter, and launches a new season of guilt-driven improvisation. If Rita lives, that entire trajectory bends. Lumen doesn't just move into a widower's empty house. She has to exist in the same space as a suspicious wife who's already seen Kyle Butler's face on the Trinity investigation board. The focus is not just on Dexter's grief, but on Rita's mounting awareness that her husband's late nights keep intersecting with serial killers. To keep this clear, think about the dominoes we know. Deb's discovery of Dexter's code is delayed or twisted. Without the hospital bed version of Rita's absence haunting her, Deb's breakdown might come earlier, triggered by watching her brother gaslight a living wife rather than mourning a dead one. LaGuardia's fate in the shipping container also shifts. A Rita who has survived Trinity and watched the Bay Harbor butcher case up close might end up as an unexpected witness or moral anchor. Does Deb still pull the trigger if Rita is standing outside that container demanding the truth? Or does the plan to frame LaGuardia fail in a different, even messier way? Once we accept that, we can see how some deaths might quietly vanish. If the family implodes earlier, through divorce, exposure, or a failed attempt at confession, Deb may never be in that hospital room in New Blood, never on that ventilator with Dexter playing executioner. A Rita who forces Dexter out of the house could keep Harrison away from Miami Metro entirely, removing him from the crosshairs of later investigations and from Iron Lake's final bloodbath, but erasing one set of casualties opens space for others. Along the way, Dexter's attempts to protect his secret from both law and family would create new crossfire. Lumen might become a liability Rita has to confront, not a temporary partner who exits cleanly. Hannah could arrive into a household already cracked by lies, turning from romantic escape plan into direct rival for Harrison's loyalty. Even Vogel or the Iron Lake victims might trade places with new bodies, neighbors, co-workers, anyone who gets too close as Dexter's domestic and homicidal lives grind against each other. The central question here isn't just who dies instead. It's what this alternate season structure reveals about control. Change one scene, and we don't simply swap Rita's death for someone else's. We expose how tightly woven Dexter's plans are with the people around him, and how fragile that web becomes when even one strand refuses to break on cue. So, as we move into the final stretch of this video, we're going to turn that lens over to you. Which character's fate feels most unstable in this alternate timeline, and why? Is it Deb, LaGuardia, Harrison, or someone further out on the edge of the frame? Hold that thought, because the next section is going to test those instincts against one last brutal scenario. But let's kick things off by pressing on the softest, most seductive fantasy in this entire what if. If Rita lives, why doesn't Dexter just do what he eventually does in New Blood, only sooner? Grab Rita, Harrison, a store, Cody, vanish before the investigation tightens and reboot the Morgan family in some quiet, snow-covered nowhere. On paper, it sounds like a plan. In practice, it's a blueprint for another collapse. Because the central question isn't whether Dexter can disappear. It's whether he can disappear with 4 dependents, an active Bay Harbor butcher mythology, and a dark passenger that doesn't respect state lines. Operationally, this is a nightmare. 1 forged identity is risky. 4 is a flashing siren. Dexter has no established pipeline for documents, no offshore accounts, no cash stockpile sized for a family of 5. Every plane ticket, rental car, and school registration leaves a new trail, and unlike his solitary lumberjack trajectory, here he's dragging a caravan of paperwork behind him. To keep this clear, the moment he enrolls Harrison in daycare or Rita applies for a job, the low profile shatters. Routine background checks become an investigation waiting to happen, and that's assuming Rita even agrees. She's a domestic violence survivor, a woman who rebuilt her life through support systems, therapy, and the fragile stability of that suburban house. For her to abandon Astor's friends, Cody's school, her own hard-won normalcy, Dexter would need a story big enough to justify exile. Random danger? A vague threat from an old case? That might buy a weekend away. It doesn't explain burning their entire existence to the ground. Here's the pattern interrupt. Even if she says yes, she brings her questions with her. The focus is not just on geography, it's on psychology. In a new town, with no Lagerta, no Deb, no Masuka to absorb suspicion. Every odd behavior from Dexter is amplified. Why does he keep late hours when there is no homicide unit calling? Why does he lock the shed? Why does he flinch when the news mentions a missing person 2 states over? Isolation doesn't calm Rita's anxieties, it concentrates them. Now imagine Harrison's childhood in that pressure cooker. He grows up with parents who jump at every knock, who move again the second someone gets too friendly. Kids read tension before they understand it. As he ages into his own questions, he's going to dig. Old newspaper clippings. A stray Bay Harbor butcher headline. Maybe a half-overheard argument where Rita finally demands the truth. When he realizes they weren't running from monsters, but traveling with one, the anger and betrayal we see in Iron Lake don't vanish, they just arrive earlier and hit more people. In the end, any escape with Rita alive breaks on the same reef as Miami. Dexter still refuses full confession. The code still demands new kills. His family still needs truth. He will not give. Different zip code, same trajectory of failure. And that leads us to the final turn. If he can't run, and he can't confess, what's left for this version of Dexter to do? So if he can't run, and he won't confess, we're left with the most disturbing option. Dexter stays. He keeps the house, the backyard barbecues, the bedtime stories, and the kill room. This is where the central question stops being abstract and starts feeling surgical. Which is more monstrous? A serial killer who targets bad people while trying to keep his kids safe, or a man who knowingly builds a family on a fault line he knows will eventually crack under them? In this video, we're going to treat that as an investigation, not a slogan. To keep this clear, we use Rita's survival as our primary case study. Imagine season 5 not as single dad Dexter, with Lumen in the house, but as Rita waking up every night to check the locks, flinching when Dexter's phone buzzes, watching him disappear on late cases that never quite add up. No blood-filled bathtub, no corpse in the tiles, but years of low-grade terror. She doesn't die in one night of horror. She dies in pieces over a decade. And that raises the ugliest possibility. Would her life have been less damaged if she'd never met him at all? Or if Trinity had killed her outright in that bathroom? A quick, brutal end versus a long, confusing collapse built from half-truths, missing hours, and unexplained police attention. Dexter's plan to be husband and father becomes its own slow-motion crime scene. Harrison, in this version, doesn't just inherit darkness, he inherits a shattered narrative about who his father is. One story from Rita, whose fear leaks through every reassurance. Another from Deb, whose guilt and resentment warp her attempts at honesty. And then Dexter himself, offering carefully edited memories, heroic spins on his own restraint, a code presented as quirky discipline instead of a moral disaster. 3 competing scripts, one confused kid trying to stitch them together. The focus is not just on what Dexter does in the shadows, but on how love functions inside that architecture of control, because he does love them. He holds Harrison, he comforts Rita, he believes he's protecting them. But love without honesty becomes another instrument, a way to keep Rita from leaving, a way to keep Harrison close enough to mold. Protection and possession start to look identical when the person in charge writes all the rules and hides all the evidence. Along the way, every normal milestone becomes morally loaded. Harrison's first day of school, a family vacation, a quiet dinner. Is Dexter there because he's choosing them, or because being dad is the last camouflage that still works? When he skips a kill to attend a recital, is that growth, or just strategic restraint to preserve the cover story? In this alternate world where Rita lives, Dexter is forced to watch the damage he causes accumulate in real time. Does that make him more tragic because he sees the harm and can't change, or less sympathetic because he keeps choosing himself anyway? And if the next crisis finally forces a choice between his code and his family, which side of that line do we really believe he'll fall on? So when we rewind that bathtub, we're not just saving a character, we're stripping away Dexter's cleanest excuse. No tragic tableau, no frozen moment that lets him tell himself the story ended there. To keep this clear, let's track what we actually did. We went back to the season 4 finale, pulled Rita out of that tub, and let her live with the knowledge that something is profoundly wrong with the man she married. From there, we followed the trajectory forward through a season 5 where Lumen never moves into his house, through a world where Kyle Butler is an open wound in the Trinity investigation, through a Miami metro that has one more living witness and one less martyr. Along the way, every familiar plan had to bend. Dexter's fantasy of being a good husband fractures when Rita starts asking why danger keeps orbiting their family. His careful killer routines warp under the pressure of a spouse who won't conveniently disappear. His attempt to be a protective father to Harrison now plays out in front of a mother who remembers a crying baby on a bloody floor and refuses to accept bad luck as an answer. The details shift, but the pattern doesn't. Each time Dexter reaches for control, the universe hands him another failure. That's the central question this whole thought experiment exposes. Is Dexter defined by his mastery, or by the collapse of every system he builds to feel safe? In this video, we're going to keep arguing for the second one. Harry's code, the suburban marriage, the later retreats with Hannah, or into Iron Lake are all framed as plans to contain the darkness. In practice, they're just different stages of the same investigation into his own limits, and the evidence is brutal. Rita surviving turns her from symbol into agent. Instead of a tragic loss that Dexter can fold into his mythology, she becomes a living critique of it. Her trauma highlights how flimsy the double life really is. How easily a perfect cover cracks when someone pays attention to the nights out, the half-truths, the uncanny way danger follows one man. By reacting, questioning, maybe separating, she forces Dexter to confront the psychology under the code, not just the rules themselves. And when we plug her into our 3 layers of failure, everything sharpens. Operational missteps no longer vanish with the body. They accumulate in front of a living witness who remembers faces, names, timelines. Relational blind spots are no longer abstract. They're voiced by a recovering survivor who can tell Dexter explicitly that his love is not enough to offset the consequences. The existential lie that the code equals control loses its comforting finality, because there is no single bathtub to point to, only a long, messy aftermath. So as we move into the final stretch, we're left with a more uncomfortable version of this story. No neat, tragic ending, just ongoing consequence. What does it mean if Dexter's real punishment isn't death or exile, but being forced to live with people who finally see him? And between the story we got and the story where Rita lives to call him out, which one actually feels more honest to the monster we've been watching all along? So now we hand it to you. If we strip away the shock value and just look at the long arc of control and collapse, which life would you actually choose for these characters? The version we watched, where Rita dies in that bathtub, but Dexter's double life is forced into the open bit by bit, or this alternate trajectory, where she survives Trinity, raises Harrison, and spends years trapped inside a marriage built on corrosive half-truths and staged normalcy. To keep this clear, pick one person and really sit with them. Rita, Deb, Harrison, Hannah, LaGuerta. Whose fate changes most violently if Rita walks out of that house alive? Tell us in the comments which character you're choosing and walk through one specific moment we've talked about. Maybe it's Deb in the shipping container, staring down Dexter and LaGuerta while Rita is outside that dock, already suspicious. Maybe it's Harrison as a teenager, not bathed in his mother's blood, confronting a father whose entire code has been exposed as a domestic lie. Let's kick things off with a focused challenge. Imagine you are writing from that character's point of view. How does Rita, being alive, reframe their psychology in one key decision? Does Deb still pull the trigger in the container if she knows Rita has already threatened to take the kids and leave? Does LaGuerta push the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation harder if she sees a pattern of accidents around Dexter's family that never quite add up? Now the central question for this section, and we want a clear yes or no from you. At any point in this alternate timeline, should Dexter have confessed to Rita outright? If your answer is yes, pinpoint the least destructive moment. Post-Trinity, when she survives and he could frame it as a near miss. Post-Lumen, when his vigilantism has already bled into their home. Post-LaGuerta, when the investigation has come so close that continuing the plan feels like slow-motion suicide. Which confession timing leaves the fewest bodies in its wake, and which one simply accelerates the collapse? Pattern, interrupt. Forget canon for a second. In this video, we're going to keep analyzing Dexter's failed plans, but we want you to start drafting your own. Rewrite one scene. Maybe it's the original shipping container confrontation. Deb, LaGuerta, Dexter, and now Rita arriving because Harrison called her, terrified. Who walks out? Or jump ahead to Iron Lake and imagine Harrison's first real confrontation with Dexter, while Rita is still alive somewhere, carrying the full story of Trinity, the code, and every cover story Dexter ever used. Along the way, remember the retention hook we've been circling. Rewatching Dexter with Rita alive turns the show into a different kind of psychological horror. The focus is not just on blood or bodies, but on lies that keep almost working. Every season becomes an investigation into failed plans that don't end with a single bathtub, but with a family living in the long, echoing aftermath. So when we circle back to that bathroom, whether Rita is dead in the tub or barely breathing on the floor, we're not just replaying a shock twist. we're returning to the exact moment Dexter's fantasy of control shatters, the night the plan of a safe double life finally proves itself to be a lie. That's why it haunts the fandom. It's the fault line where everything he tells himself about who he is collides with what his actions actually do. In the original timeline, Rita's death is the brutal proof that Harry's code cannot contain the consequences anymore. Harrison in blood. A wife sacrificed off-screen while Dexter chased the perfect kill. In the alternate version we've been building, she survives. But the damage doesn't just evaporate. The investigation into Kyle Butler, the questions about where Dexter was, the quiet, accumulating suspicion in Rita's eyes, all become a slower, more suffocating kind of horror. The marriage lives, but the illusion dies. To keep this clear, the central question isn't really, would Rita live a happier life? It's, what does it cost to keep Dexter's story going once the mask has cracked? When we imagine Rita staying alive through Season 5, through Lumen's vigilante arc, through Deb's unraveling, we're not playing a harmless what-if game. We're testing the psychology of the show's own choices, asking why the writers decided the only way forward was to burn the family fantasy down in one night. Because alternate timelines like this are tools. They let us reverse engineer why the original hurt so much. If we can picture Rita confronting Dexter instead of dying, or the two of them trying to run with the kids while every plan collapses around them, we see our own beliefs reflected back at us. What do we think justice looks like here? A punishment? A confession? A second chance that inevitably fails? What do we think love owes a man who keeps choosing the kill room over the kitchen table? In this video, we're going to keep using that lens beyond Rita. The focus is not just on Dexter's body count, but on every moment where a character's self-image breaks under the weight of unintended consequences. Along the way, we'll keep dissecting iconic TV turning points the same way. Deb's final season as a case study in loyalty turned self-destruction, Iron Lake as a failed retirement plan, other shows entirely where a single decision sends a whole trajectory crashing down. So if you want more deep dive rewrites, more plan autopsies, more investigations into the gap between who characters think they are and what their actions prove, you know what to do. Subscribe, hit the bell, and tell us which collapse you want opened up next. And hold on to that last image. Dexter in the doorway of that bathroom, in both timelines at once. One where Rita dies. One where she lives long enough to know him. In both, the same truth waiting in the mirror. He was never as in control as he needed to believe.